Fine, try this then, Yuri exclaimed as she opened her mouth. Thankfully, she was far enough away this time to gather positive and negative chakra to the center of her mouth. With Isobu controlling the orb, she quickly fired it as a stream of concussive water outward. She fired it into the ground, breaking apart the ground and the trees with them. She then smirked when she sensed Ashiki. She focused all her power on her eyes and finally saw Ashiki. He was tiny, almost impossibly tiny. She wasn't sure how he had shrunk himself, but it didn't matter. All that mattered was the Rasengan she held in her hand while Isobu, Shizune, and Ebisu helped her mold the technique. Sweden. Rasengan. Rasenumi Sakai, Water Release, Spiraling Sphere, Spiraling World of Seas. Yuri shouted as she held up several small, gleaming orbs encased in a violent torrent of water. She zeroed in on Ashiki and immediately appeared in front of him. The Otsutsuki snarled momentarily, quickly realizing that she could see him. Activating his right eye, he summoned a giant black cube as Yuri slammed her jutsu into its fearsome body. Ashiki gritted his teeth, feeling the box shake against his palm. He quickly summoned another large box and dropped it on top of Yuri. The Sanbi Jinchuiriki watched the box approach. She then held up her hand. Immediately, Shizune and Ebisu flew out and lifted up the box. Ashiki's eyes narrowed in anger, the two of them crashing into the ground. The roar of the sea cascaded over the land, turning a once desolate wasteland into a sunken ground. Ashiki swam through the water, feeling the strong tide swirl around him before he noticed Yuri floating in front of him. Bubbles seeped from her body as Isobu's chakra cloak covered her body. A hard spiked shell sprouted from her back. She launched herself at Ashiki, the water increasing her speed as the Otsutsuki raised his arms to defend himself. Her fist slammed into his arms as they traded punches and blows. Ashiki's head was blown to the side until he buried his foot in Yuri's torso. She grabbed his leg and flew him further down into the water until they reached the bottom. The young redhead was ready to unleash another blow right at the Otsutsuki's face until she noticed his hand light up ominously. Jump back, Isobu hollered as Yuri pushed herself back. No sooner than her doing so did Ashiki unleash a blast containing the very stars themselves from his palm. Yuri looked up as the blast flew out of the water and into the sky. Even beneath the waves, she felt the rumble of the skies as the clouds parted, sucked away as if they had never been there in the first place. She then glared back at Ashiki. She saw his eyes light up in realization. Yuri quickly swam off as Ishiki fired another blast from his palms. Just the aftershocks from each one made the ground shake. Yuri then sucked her teeth and flew out of the sea she'd created. She rose into the air and swiftly sped through a number of hand signs. The spikes from the shell on her back exploded out, sailing through the air like countless raining missiles. Yuri then swung his arms, pure honcho as sharp as swords ripping from the tips of her fingers. Knowledge of the human anatomy flew through her mind from Shizune and Ebisu. The spiked missiles from her shell crashed into the sea she'd created. Like rain, they propelled into the water. She watched the surface explode as a large wall of the sea was ferociously uplifted. Her breath remained steady as the wall of liquid slowly fell to reveal Otsutsuki Ashiki completely unharmed. To think, there is a body that even the servants of death can't kill. Yet, the more I strike you, the more power I absorb. How long do you plan to continue this wretched resistance? Ashiki questioned. Despite the taunt, Yuri's gaze hardened. Until you're nothing but a greasy smear on my fist. Believe me, I'm gonna enjoy this more than I should Datbayan. Yuri fired back as she landed on top of the water. Ashiki landed with her. As soon as their feet touched its surface, they charged toward each other. Ashiki let out a fist that Yuri swiftly dodged. Yuri then swung the blades from her hands. Ashiki blocked both blows, throwing a kick out. The Sanbi Jinchuiriki jumped up and landed on his leg before swirling her body. Using her momentum, she swung the blades at Ashiki's legs and ankles. She then felt Ashiki grab her leg. Yet, it didn't matter. Shizune and Ebisu flew out of Yuri's body and placed their palms on Ashiki's chest and stomach. Two sealing matrices appeared on his body. From them, black ink sprouted out. The ink stuck to Ashiki's body, its stickiness clinging and mixing with the water. Ashiki lifted his arm, momentarily surprised by the strength of such a rudimentary mixture of chemical elements. However, that was a moment that Yuri took full advantage of. Before Ashiki could correct himself, Yuri's fist crashed into his face. His body was blown back, yet the stickiness of the ink kept him pinned, reinforced with Yuri's powerful chakra and Honsho. Ashiki quickly groaned in pain as Yuri threw blow after blow in his face. The powerful crunch of his bones against her fists only made her swing faster. "Don't get cocky, you inferior creature," Ashiki shouted, quickly attempting to gather his chakra through his body. Yet, to his surprise, he noticed that he couldn't. Amidst the pain and the flurry of blows Yuri laid upon him, he felt even his shoulders get dislocated, but the chakra wasn't healing him. In fact, he noticed that it was all starting to backlash on his body, his life force dwindling severely. "You're looking pretty pale there. Is something wrong?" Yuri inquired, pulling her fist back and opening her palm. She quickly crafted a Rasengan in her hand, a large dome of water around it. Ashiki growled at her. "You wretch! What did you do to me?" he roared at her. Now that was the expression Yuri had been hoping for. That said, she didn't bother answering his question. Instead, she pressed her assault. Sweden. Rasensuchu Jigokugen water release, spiraling underwater hell sphere. Yuri exclaimed as she slammed the Rasengan into Ashiki's torso. For the first time, his face twisted in agony as she shoved the ball further into his chest. The inky water rippled and rended, even its own sticky substance giving way to the sheer force that the Sanbi Jinchuriki pushed into the Otsutsuki. She ground the ball against his flesh, watching his chest cave in on itself before the explosion blasted him out of the ink and through the air. Yuri quickly raced after him. She appeared next to him immediately, her hands coated with the Honsho blades. Raw! With a furious shout, Yuri weaved her hands and legs back and forth, swiping her swords through Ashiki's body without rest. The ink swirled around them both before she lifted her heel and planted it in his chin. She fired him upward and she took off after him. Flying past him, Yuri slammed her hands together and roared out, transforming into the full might of the Sanbi. The turtle crab three tails glared down at the aching Otsutsuki before he opened his mouth, the ink from below concentrating itself at the center. Sweden. Daikaisumiden water release, great ink mass bullet. Yuri and Isobu shouted as the Sanbi released a blast of water that easily dwarfed Ashiki's frame. The water bullet crashed into his body and crashed into the ground. The ground thundered and quaked as the barren plains were turned into a wretched, sunken cavern. The Sanbi continued to sail down before he pulled his head, arms, and legs into his shell. His body then began to spin wildly, kicking up wind. Lesser tornadoes spiraled about, devastating whatever they could while the Jinchuriki and her Biju made their own down. Choden Koro, leaping bullet shell tower. The two shouted as Isobu's deathly spinning body crashed into the canyon and Ashiki along with it. The spikes raked into the ground at such a high velocity that heat mixed with dust and dirt, igniting it into a spinning pillar of exploding fire. The canyon was swiftly leveled to its foundations without mercy. Isobu's body quickly dispelled and Uzumaki Yuri returned. Her cloaked feet stepped on the burning ground, her eyes flaring with power before she noticed Ashiki in the midst of it all, his body crushed in several places. She approached him and grabbed his torso. She then lifted him up. He snarled at her, blood spilling out from the side of his face while she clenched her hand into a fist. Why is this happening? My chakra is spiraling out of control. It won't heal the damage that the divine power is causing to me. I can't even feel my arms and legs. My body isn't responding. What did she do to me? Question after question rolled through Ashiki's mind with no answer. Was he really going to lose his life like this, and especially so quickly? Don't be too upset. I was fighting demons and corrupted humans in the war against Jashin. As far as I'm concerned, you would have made a good warm-up for that, Yuri taunted. However, before launching her fist forward, she suddenly felt a surge of energy coming toward her. A smile came upon her face as she recognized her lover's unique energy signature. She turned her head, but her smile swiftly turned into confusion when she saw a massive sword slash come over her. Its force was nothing impressive, passing over her like a breeze. Yet, that wasn't the concerning thing. What the? Yuri instantly realized that she couldn't hear Isobu's voice anymore. She couldn't even hear Shizune and Ebisu. Even more horrifying was that she couldn't feel her power, whether chakra or Honsho, flowing through her anymore. Her body had returned to normal. Her arm was no longer glowing with power. It was just ordinary. Unfortunately, Yuri wasn't allowed to ponder this problem more because she swiftly dropped Ashiki and blocked the swing of a sword from the regent. The force was more than she expected, pushing her back at least half a mile while she snarled. She then noticed Obito, Zetsu, and Shino step out of the Kamui. She glared at them all, trying to summon her strength, yet she realized it was all gone. In fact, she'd just been given the bare minimum to not die. "That's quite enough out of you, my third queen. You have achieved enough," the regent said as Yuri's face contorted in anger. "What did you do to me?" she asked. The regent didn't answer. Instead, he turned to Obito and nodded. The Uchiha approached the fallen Otsutsuki. "All your talk and this is what you amount to. I'm starting to wonder if we allied with the right person. However, it's far too late to turn back now. You better know what you're doing," he said as he pulled out the Shinigami mask. "Put that down," Yuri roared as she instantly appeared in front of Obito and the others. Unfortunately, she was swiftly parried by Shino. The man grabbed her fist and planted his foot in her chest. She crashed into the ground and scowled when she leaned up. "Cease your struggle, Uzumaki Yuri. All your advantages have been sealed momentarily. You are nothing but a paper tiger at the moment," Obito claimed. Yuri gritted her teeth before the others heard and felt the ground shake. In the far distance, they saw Sasuke's complete Susanoo standing tall in the horizon. "I believe we better act quickly. It will not take them long to find us and our plan will be ruined," Black Zetsu claimed urgently. They all could easily feel the strange energy emitting from that direction, likely from Yura and Sasuke. If those two came over there, there would be no hope for them. "I agree," Shino claimed as Obito took the mask and placed it on Ashiki's face. Yuri gritted her teeth as she stared in horror, watching the broken body of Ashiki levitate up until he stood back on his feet. He then held up his hands as Yuri sensed the unparalleled, divine strength of the Shinigami fall over the area. However, never had she seen an angrier expression on the god of death. His beady eyes bore down upon the mortals which had forcefully summoned him. Yet, he was forced to mimic Ashiki's movements. "Do it," Ashiki ordered. The regent nodded and stabbed his sword into Ashiki's stomach. "Shinigami-sama," Yuri shouted as the Shinigami stabbed his stomach. The regent then ripped through Ashiki's stomach, the same wound coming through as the Shinigami painfully ripped open his own stomach. Scowling, Yuri stood to his feet and tried to summon all the chakra and honsho that she could. However, it simply wasn't enough. In the end, she charged at the group. Shino quickly intercepted her. The two traded blows before the former kicked her back. Yuri slid on the ground before she pulled out a kunai with a paper bomb. She threw it at the group along with a handful of smoke bombs. The scowl on her face only rose higher when Shino sped through several hand signs. Futon, Daitapa, wind release. Great breakthrough, he cast out, releasing a furious wind that blew the smoke bombs and paper bomb tagged kunai away. Yuri jumped away from the wind technique and seethed as she raked her mind with questions that had no answer. Then, she watched four souls emerge from the Shinigami's stomach. However, she quickly sensed great power coming before they could fully form. Susanoo, Honsho, Yaokesu, Susanoo, power of life, returning arrow ruining. Yuri and the rest of the Akatsuki looked up as a dark purple arrow, covered in black and golden flames, sailed for their position. Aside from the regent, every Akatsuki member felt a nervous bead of sweat. The technique wasn't ready. Due to the Shinigami possession, Obito couldn't touch Ashiki at this moment. He was utterly vulnerable. If that arrow hit, the entire plan would be turned to dust. Obito ran through his hand signs before his arm was coated in black lightning. Yet, before he could retaliate, the regent held a hand on his chest, stopping him. Before Obito could begin to question why the regent would deny him the possibility of parrying the technique, two flashes appeared, the taller of the two smacking the arrow away. The arrow sailed off into the distance, exploding the ground and everything within them for the next 20 miles. A pillar of black and golden fire flew through the air and past the clouds. Far off, Sasuke and Yura growled. "What? Who stopped?" Sasuke said before he suddenly heard the kindred scream from within him. Their voices grew smaller while Yura noticed her golden and violent flames swiftly dissipate. Her red hair returned as she looked at herself in shock. "What? The Honsho? I can't," Yura gasped, struggling to summon the gold and violet flames but to no avail. Sasuke watched her actions from the Susanoo. Even the golden wings that sprouted from its backside had faded away. Hell, the Uchiha nearly felt his own power diminish. "Hey, what the hell is going on?" Sasuke asked, turning to Yura. The redhead looked at him before she looked down and noticed the ripped stomach of the shinigami. As the smoke cleared, a shiver ran through her entire body when she saw the same robed Otsutsuki that she, Yuri, and Naruto met before. Their faces and bodies were a little more bruised, yet the status of their might was simply unparalleled. It took all of her nerve to keep herself from trembling in front of them. They stopped the attack and, with just a wave of the wrist, Yura replied. Meanwhile, on the ground, the Akatsuki looked up in surprise. Whoa, I thought we were going to die there. Who saved us? White Zetsu asked. No one seemed capable of answering the question before Nanashiki gazed upon the group. She eyed them almost pitiably, almost as if one looked at an insect. Finish your ritual, lower lifeforms. The Great Will has expended immense influence to see this through, she spoke, her voice enough to make nearly all of them shudder. If there was one thing they noticed, it was that these two figures looked exactly like Ashiki. Did she call us lower lifeforms? Shino questioned. Well, he wasn't willing to have them come down and give them the answer to that question. Just looking at them made him feel like he was driving into the edge of insanity. Yet he couldn't look away, almost none of them could. It felt like their minds were being crushed beneath the weight of nigh insurmountable power, an existence far beyond shinobi or humanity in general. It was as if the very essence of being, soul, spirit, will, and all that made them up was being burned away. The only reason they lived was when the regent turned their gazes away, slapping their faces with great force. Stare not at the main act so intensely lest you find yourself drawn into performing practices you are not ready for. Complete your parts, the regent said. Obito, Shino, and Zetsu, curious as to how the regent could withstand the pressure from those two mysterious beings when they couldn't, stared at the masked Akatsuki member for a long moment before Black Zetsu spoke. I agree. We should finish quickly, he said. One day, I will find out what you're hiding, regent. Mark my words, Obito thought to himself before he noticed the souls taken from the Shinigami's stomach quickly appear. As expected, all four of them were obvious to tell, especially for him. After all, he spent much of the Konoha Academy learning about three of them, and had been a part of the genin squad of the fourth one. To be brought back to the land of the living for a third time. Truly, this is an era of boundless evil. And it appears one of you is a Uchiha. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. The group noticed the tone of the Nadaime Hokage, Senju Tobarama. He glared at them all harshly. Obito took a step forward. You have only yourself to blame for creating such a jutsu, Nadaime Hokage. We're just reaping the benefits of your knowledge. Besides, the Reaper Death Seal was a technique developed by the Uzumaki clan. It's only fitting that we use a jutsu by such a distinguished relative of the Senju, don't you think? However, you three are simply extra prizes. The real prize is, you, Obito said turning toward the Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato. Far above, Sasuke and Yura noticed the scene below. They saw every Hokage standing there in front of the Akatsuki while the form of the Shinigami hovered over the body of Ashiki. Yet, he couldn't find the strength to move, nor could Yura. Hell, even Yuri, from below, was shaking. All they could do was watch the events take place. They all knew they should do something, anything even. But, the two Otsutsuki floating before them continued to forbid their approach. Neither could stop shaking, struggling to mount any sort of offense. Sasuke-san, we have to do something. Yura claimed. I know that. Sasuke exclaimed angrily. Of course he knew that, but, what were they supposed to do? Yura's power was gone, Yuri's power was gone, and he could feel his chakra continuing to decline. Even more than that, he knew they weren't going to win. It felt all but inevitable. In fact, it felt just like that time with Orochimaru back during the Chunin exams, a time that Sasuke never liked remembering. He hated that time because it took Naruto, of all people, to knock sense into him. How much chakra do you have left? Sasuke suddenly asked. The older sister shifted her gaze toward the Uchiha. She saw the stern look in his eye before she looked back at their enemy. Enough, she claimed, taking out a scroll and ink brush. She quickly started to write across its length. Meanwhile, Sasuke's Susanoo summoned the thundering might of the Chidori shrouded in Amaterasu flames. Lightning sprawled over the area as the clouds gathered around. Sasuke's eyes burned as ancient seals flew out from Yura's scroll and stuck to Sasuke's Susanoo. A bright ethereal prism covered Sasuke's black Chidori. Uzumaki Fuinjutsu. Daisen Hokokokoi Uzumaki sealing technique. Great all directions enclosement. Yura cast out, slamming her hands together. The seals on the Susanoo quickly wrapped its body in a myriad of multi-elemental chains. The Susanoo roared with the might of the elemental nations. Sasuke's clenched the Susanoo's fist and the two charged toward the group. The two hollered as the lightning scarred the ground, tearing through the landscape. Nanashiki and Nanashiki watched them approach. Sasuke roared into the open air as the Susanoo held the Chidori over its head. Chidori, Iden Kyoke-sen, 1,000 birds, 1 point dividing line. Sasuke shouted as the Susanoo clenched its fist. It then slammed the black Chidori into Nanashiki's chest. The full force of lightning chakra exploded over the skies, a pillar of black fire spearing through the clouds and even past the earth's firmament. The clouds rained down black soot. The skies grew dark as if the sun itself had been blotted out. The air crackled with thunder. The heat radiating from the blast even burned bits of skin from Sasuke's hand as he drove the Chidori into Nanashiki's chest. I commend your valor. Insolent though it might be. This is not a place where you are allowed to tread, Nanashiki claimed. Sasuke and Yura widened their eyes when they noticed the technique hadn't even made Otsutsuki Nanashiki bleed, much less impale him like they were planning. What? Not even a scratch? The Uchiha questioned in utter disbelief. The Chidori quickly dispersed and so did the black flames. Nanashiki turned to her brother. Enough games. Dispense of these pests, she remarked, rather irritated by the whole thing. Nanashiki spoke not a word. Instead, Sasuke and Yura stilled when they saw the Susanoo immediately disintegrate. Neither Sasuke nor Yura braced themselves in time before they were grabbed by their throats. Almost as quick as the Susanoo disappearing, they found their chakra sucked away to the bare minimum. Their bodies trembled, the shock of such chakra being forced from them, leaving them gasping for breath. They were then thrown away, Yuri catching her sister and the Uchiha. They all crashed into the side of a rock wall before Yuri shared what chakra she could with them. Yura-ne, Sasuke-san. Yuri replied frantically, struggling to keep them conscious. The two of them went into coughing fits, gasping for air as Yuri restored at least some chakra to them. Sasuke rolled over and grunted, slamming his fist into the ground. That was the same thing that happened to Tayuya. Damn it. Sasuke growled while Yura leaned up in pain. The three could only watch on as Obito undressed Minato's torso. What are you doing? The Yondaime Hokage questioned angrily. He struggled to move, yet found himself completely at the mercy of the masked man who had prevented him from being a father. Taking what should have been mine in the first place, Obito remarked as he weaved through several hand signs and touched the ground. KB Hoin, tail releasing method. Seals wrapped around Minato's body as he gritted his teeth. His shinobi vest burst open as everyone bore witness to the 8 trigram seal on Minato's abdomen. You play a dangerous game and mess with powers beyond your comprehension. Know that none of you will have a peaceful end, Tobirama warned. At this point, it was all he could do. The being behind him, still possessed by the shinigami, was formidable. Just this guy's chakra alone was enough to subdue all 4 Hokage. He'd never seen anyone subdue his brother so easily. Strange, Uzumaki Naruto should be handling this. Where is he? Tobirama thought to himself before he saw Obito activate the seal. Instantly, Minato grunted in pain as the yin half of the Kyuubi no Yoko was forcefully dragged out of his body. Minato screamed out in agony and all the 3rd Hokage could do was watch as his successor was tortured, having the Biju forcefully extracted from him. What are they doing? Yura asked as a bead of sweat fell down Yuri's forehead. Isobu says they are extracting the Kyuubi from the guy over there. But Naruto needs the one with the Kyuubi. It was turned into a being of pure Honsho. Why is it in that guy? Yuri asked. Sasuke managed to lean on his side, his breath heated from exhaustion. Look who he's surrounded by. That's the Shadaime, Nadaime, and Sandaime Hokage. We've looked at them enough back in the academy. And, if those 3 are there, then that blonde man has to be the Yondaime Hokage, Sasuke huffed out painfully. Yura and Yuri remained silent momentarily, the shock almost too heavy to fathom. Yondaime, Hokage, Namikaze Minato-san. Isn't that Nisama's father? Yura asked, watching as the yin half of Kurama was extracted from his body. Yuri clenched her fists and shakingly stood to her feet. Damn it, we have to do something, she urged. Yura and Sasuke agreed, but neither knew how they would accomplish that. Their chakra was dangerously low, even lower than a civilian's. Sasuke didn't even have the chakra necessary to activate the Sharingan. The voices of Lamb and Wolf had been ruthlessly silenced. I'm not sure what we can do, Sasuke said, eyeing the two Otsutsuki in the air. He could only look at them for about a minute before his body started shaking like he was about to lose his nerve. It even felt like the very essence of his soul was being drained away, and they didn't even look in his direction. What kind of Otsutsuki were these? Minato groaned out as he felt the Kyuubi extracted from his body. His reanimated flesh started to collapse as his chakra spiraled out of control. Hashirama frowned, glaring harshly at the people who were causing harm to the young man. While he had no idea who he was, it was obvious that he was a Jinchuriki, very much like Mito. And even worse than that, it was the Kyuubi. The very same beast that Madara had used against him. What are you doing to that young man? Stop this immediately, or I will retaliate, Hashirama claimed boldly. Obito continued to draw out the Kyuubi before he turned an eye to the Shadaime Hokage. You are a mighty figure, Senju Hashirama. However, not even your formidable power can take a stand here. This is a matter which far transcends the elemental nations. We now deal in the realm of the gods themselves, Obito responded. He then touched Ashiki's torso. Minato's agonizing screams only increased in intensity. Everyone watched on as Kurama roared into the air for only a moment before it was forced into its new host, Otsutsuki Ashiki. The man's chakra violently exploded, expanding by the second. Yuri scowled as she watched the damage she'd inflicted on him start to heal itself. Even his ripped-open stomach had begun to recover as the yin half of the Kyuubi found itself nestled inside his body. Strange markings took shape around Ashiki's arms and legs, the Honsho, dark chakra, and chakra from the Kyuubi mixing and contrasting with each other. Then, Otsutsuki Ashiki began to laugh. He cackled, feeling the power rolling through every core cell in his body. As suspected, the last one standing will be Otsutsuki Ashiki. This is more power than I have ever experienced. Ashiki taunted as Yuri, and Sasuke felt the ground tremble beneath their feet. Pockets of hot steam bursted from broken ground. The canyon-like landscape crumbled in on itself, nearly smothering Sasuke and the Uzumaki sisters. The ground slipped away, trembling from the pain as Ashiki slowly started to ascend into the air. The four Hokage and members of the Akatsuki watched him, the very skies themselves seeming to warm around his presence. Ha 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 ha. I shall ascend to the highest realm of. Ashiki suddenly stopped when all his power suddenly disappeared. He looked down, gasping when he saw Nanashiki holding him by the throat. Enough of your pathetic grandstanding. This is taking too long. We will depart immediately. You will not inconvenience the Great Will with your embarrassing acts. Let's go, Nanashiki ordered. No sooner than that did Nanashiki, Ashiki, and the members of Akatsuki fade away. Along with them went the four Hokage. Everything happened so quickly that Yuri, and Sasuke weren't sure what to make of their disappearance. The land lay in disarray as if it had been turned into a war zone. What the fuck just happened? Yuri asked, standing to her feet only to fall to her knees on the ground. Her legs wouldn't stop shaking, the air still stunk of the indescribable might of the Otsutsuki and the shock of losing all her power. I don't know. Where did they go? Yuri asked. Sasuke leaned up painfully, growling and trying to take stock of the situation. The Dobi was missing, Otsutsuki Ashiki was apparently working with other Otsutsuki, he managed to make use of Honsho and Chakra, the four Hokage were resurrected, the Yondaime Hokage had the Kyuubi extracted from him and Ashiki had become the new Jinchuriki. Oh, and they all vanished into thin air. Yeah, that seemed about right. Before Sasuke could speak further, a strong blast of lightning and fire came. Both slowly settled before they saw a man with steely eyes and a black-haired woman appear on the ground. When those two landed, all hope of retaliation left Yuri, and Sasuke's bodies. They found themselves stunned by the tremendous divine pressure that exuded from the two individuals. Without Honsho to help them soften the blow, the three were left shaking, even attempting to stare in the general direction of those who appeared. They were here. It hasn't been too long. Unfortunately, it seems like they managed to return to their providence. It will be hard to judge them with the false god always there. It doesn't help that Mother continues to provide no answer for him. Now even Shinigami has been injured. It will take time for him to heal, the man said. The woman frowned as she stepped forward. Belie that kind of talk, Raijin. Mother's ways are not our ways. We have spent eons studying and learning from her, yet none of us have ever managed to understand why she allows certain things. We must believe there is a good reason, the woman said before she turned around and noticed Yuri, Yura, and Sasuke. It was small, but she sensed the remnants of the shinigami upon all of them. Her eyes lingered on Sasuke for a moment before her lips curved upwards. She walked over to them, Raijin's gaze following her. We are not to interact with lesser creatures, he motioned, his glare hard. Nevertheless, Amaterasu ignored him and approached the two Uzumaki and the Uchiha. None of them could even utter a single word, the monstrous weight of her divine presence enough to make them all nearly go mad. Please, Shinigami has done so, and so has Jashin and Susanoo. Besides, look at them. They can look upon us and not instantly go mad. This should be an acceptable exception, Amaterasu said before she touched Sasuke's forehead. Immediately, every memory of the incident rushed from his head into hers in nearly an instant. The longer she watched, the greater the smile on her face became. Once she was done, she did the same to Yuri and Yura. As expected, they were relatives and lovers of the Shinigami's summoner. Strangely enough, she could sense his fading energy in the far distance. No doubt the injury inflicted on the Shinigami was the same that was inflicted upon him. If anything, it looked like if his injuries weren't treated, then he'd be flowing into the underworld soon enough. Well, that wasn't Amaterasu's business. He should have been dead anyway. Having extracted the information that she wanted, Amaterasu stood up. Alright, it looks like we have all that we need. It's as we suspected. That bastard is likely looking to do what we assumed. Gather Tsukuyomi and Susanoo. We should convene a congress, Amaterasu declared, making Raijin sigh. He then covered his hand in lightning and blasted it into the air. It's done. Now let's go, he returned, settling his gaze on his older sister. Amaterasu swiftly nodded and was ready to leave before their presence tore the fabric of this realm to dust. It was already beginning to unravel from the presence of those two lower beings who just left. It would take time to heal. Amaterasu rejoined her younger brother and prepared to return to the celestial realm. Yet, her steps slowed to a stop and she looked back at the humans. The look on her face tightened, especially when their mother showed the state of her brother. She lowered her head and sighed. She then approached Sasuke, Yura, and Yuri. She touched their heads and offered them the smallest bit of honsho. Before Raijin could even ask why she would do something so ridiculous, Amaterasu turned to him and grabbed his arm. Let's go, she said. As for Yuri, Yura, and Sasuke, the three felt their breaths return to normal when the two gods vanished. The earth slowly started to return to normal as Yuri slumped to the ground. My body won't stop shaking. What's going on? I feel like I couldn't speak. First, those GG guys disappear, and now we've got literal gods coming down here again. Yuri stammered, struggling to regain control of herself. I don't know, but I suddenly have a very bad feeling. I can sense Nisama. His energy is fading fast. I think he's in trouble, Yura commented, the weight of her words making Yuri tremble. She struggled to stand up but found herself brought back down. Sasuke managed to stand to his feet, using the rocky wall for support. Yeah, I sense it too. That Dobi's definitely in trouble. The two of you should hurry and get feeling in your legs. No one's gonna be able to sense him better than you two. I have just enough chakra to send a message to Itachi and the others. I can send them to you for backup. If the Dobi, of all people, is in trouble, then we'd better prepare for the worst. Sasuke said. The Uzumaki sisters nodded. Under ordinary circumstances, Sasuke's request would have been damn near impossible. But knowing that their lover and clan leader could potentially be in danger was enough for the two to fight the unsteady nerves caused by the exposure to divine forces without the use of honsho. Though it was hard, they managed to stand to their feet and swiftly dash off. Meanwhile, Sasuke weaves through shaky hands and summons another serpent. He then takes out a piece of paper and writes on it with a bit of blood. He then hands the scroll to the snake and it leaves in a puff of smoke. Sasuke watched the snake go before he leaned his head against the wall. He looked up at the sky and scowled for a moment. I'm still too weak. He growled out internally, clenching his fist as his body continued to shiver from the phantom shocks of pain. Naruto was sure he was dying. Oh sure, he'd nearly died back in the Valley of the End. After that, He had become very experienced with death. He'd even died a handful of times following that experience against Sasuke. However, this one felt different. He was dying. He was really dying. It felt hard to stay awake and he was getting weaker by the second. It felt like energy was being drained out of him at a near accelerated rate. He tried to raise his arms but they felt too heavy. Yet, there was something warm against his arms, wet like a puddle but sticky like mud. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki still remembered when everything seemed to be going well. He and his mother had made it back to the elemental nations. He remembered when the shinigami appeared. It looked like they were about to achieve victory when things went wrong so quickly. The shinigami immediately disappeared. His divine aura felt a multitude of miles away. In their shock, Naruto and Kushina were quickly subdued, overwhelmed by the nigh limitless power of the two Otsutsuki. They then left and Naruto felt the power of the shinigami slowly fade from their bodies. Then came the pain. There came hot, searing, unending pain. All the Kyuubi Jinchuriki could hear were the fading screams of his mother. When he looked down, the last thing he saw before he fell was his cut-through stomach. The blood seeped out endlessly as his consciousness continued to weaken. He couldn't even hear his summons, Kagura, or Kurama. What was he going to do if he died and Kagura got away? With her power, it wouldn't be hard to possess his body. She had only been accommodating of him because he had limited control over spirits as the Shinigami's summoner. They were not friends. They weren't even allies. They were simply enemies tied together by strange circumstances. Oh crap, Naruto felt his body getting hotter. His eyes rolled up in his head as he heard even more screams, a cornucopia of distorted noises rolling over each other as shapes of shadows dipped into his dimming view. He wasn't sure what anyone was saying before his consciousness slipped away. He could feel his very being fading away almost as if nothing was left. As he lay there in that abyss of crushing nothingness, the pain racing through every inch of his body, the garbed noises seemed to give way to something a little more clear. Angst and panic gave way to understanding and calmness. Naruto struggled to open his eyes but he found himself unable to. What he did realize was that his body was trembling, not exactly from the wound that he'd been given but from the feeling of someone extraordinarily powerful looking upon him. Uzumaki Naruto, I am sure if you could see me then you would ask me numerous questions. You and my children, no doubt. Many of you wonder why I allow certain things and permit certain actions. Even why I allow some to continue in their ways. However, there are matters which must transpire in this way. Perhaps you will never know why, but know that I have set my gaze upon you, and he who holds my gaze may rest easy, for I have known you even before your very own parents have. The usurper shall not cease for he is bent on obtaining that which he cannot imagine nor contain. However, you will be able to do these things, and when the time comes you shall understand what this means. If my children could see me now, they would no doubt scold me, but what I permit and allow is for my sake. O Uzumaki Naruto, my son always knew this day would come and you shall learn why I permitted him to contract with you. For now, rest. Your end is not yet. And know that I shall be with you no matter what happens. The soothing voice continued on its way, slowly fading away until Naruto was left alone, floating amid a vast nothingness. Darkness continued to swirl around him, making him miss the voice if only to keep him tethered to something. It seemed like such a strange feeling. His mind was filled with everything and nothing at the same time. The pain persisted onward, the burning in his torn stomach made his heart race sometimes, and other times it stopped. Sometimes, it felt like he had all the power in the world coursing through his body. Other times, it felt like he was weaker than a newborn babe crying for its mother. His mind felt stuffed and vacant at the same time. All he could do was float there, aware and unaware at the same time. As Uzumaki Naruto continued to float, he wasn't sure when it was but the pain started to subside. He wasn't sure why exactly. It couldn't have been because of anything he did. He was just floating in a sea of nothingness. If he had to be thankful for anything, at least this wasn't as painful as the violet flames of the end. Those hurt a lot. If possible, he'd like never to experience any of those again to such an absurd degree. In any case, the pain continued to subside until it was all gone. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki inhaled and exhaled slowly in relief. His body was still racked with tension and uneasiness, but it was manageable. The darkness brightened just a little as he started to make out garbled noises. Over time, the garbled noises only increased in clarity as the darkness surrounding him got clearer and clearer. Months. So, yet. Not. Sore. Don't have n. Set. The fog around his mind seemed to clear as the garbled mess still became clearer. Yet, it was painfully slow. He wasn't sure what he was supposed to hear, but it became clearer with time. The only thing he really wished was that it wasn't so slow. Yet, there was a saying that the slower the climb the stronger the body would become. The Uzumaki patriarch's senses expanded until the discomfort surrounding his eyes loosened. Finally, he was permitted to open his eyes, albeit slowly. When he opened them, he immediately recognized where he was. He was back in the land of eddies, in the hospital specifically. The room was dark and he felt the soft embrace of a pillow behind his head. Looking down, he saw himself in a bed. He also realized that he wasn't alone. His mother, Yuri, and Yura were all sleeping at the sides of his bed. He tried to lean up but a searing pain came from his side. He raised his arm underneath the covers and felt bandages and gauze wrapped around the side of his stomach. When he tried to lean up, it felt like millions of ants were gnawing away at his skin while breathing fire on every inch of his body. It was agonizingly slow, yet he managed to lean himself up. Once he was up, a rag fell from the top of his head. It was damp, likely dried a little from being placed on his head. Damn, why does everything hurt? Hey Kurama, what happened? Naruto asked, trying to center his thoughts as best he could. He reached out to his partner and waited for the rough, snarky reply that always came. Yet, there wasn't one. Kurama, Pakura, Morio, Dan, Suiren, Gari, Yahiko, Kimimaro, Kagura. One by one, Uzumaki Naruto called out to all the spirits that resided within him. Yet, he received a reply from none of them. Confusion spiraled through his body and his weak body shifted in the bed. That shift was just enough to stir Yura awake. She slowly groaned and opened her eyes. She looked up and a large gasp expelled from her mouth. Ni-sama. Oh, thank the shinigami you're alright. Yura softly exclaimed as she jumped up. She placed a soft hand on his chest and cheek while Kushina and Yuri stirred, their senses as shinobi making them light sleepers. They looked up as well, seeing Yura comfort their wakened lover. Naruto ni. Sochi. Oh my god. Kushina and Yuri quietly surrounded him as well. The three redheads wept on his torso much to his confusion. His eyes were still a little blurry, but his heart went out to all three of them. Had he strength, he would have hugged them as tight as he could and wiped their tears away. But, he couldn't even do that. All he could do was sit there as they cried tears of happiness. I'll get Tsunade, Sakura, and Karen-chan. Everyone's been dying of any news about you. Yuri clamored before she raced out of the room. Naruto watched her go before he could get a word out. Even then, his words came out in haggard, raspy, broken breaths. Kushina gently pressed him back to the bed. Shish, I'm sure you have a lot of questions, Naruto. Don't try to talk. You've been sleeping for a long time. It got to the point where we thought you were never going to wake up, his beautiful mother said to him. As surprised as he was, Naruto wasn't able to let it show on his face. The discomfort was too unbearable. Yet through the pain, through the raspiness, through this discomfort, he managed one question. Ing? He inquired. Kushina and Yura looked at each other, almost as if weighing the circumstances put before them. And, Naruto thought he was strong enough to handle the information. He'd handled a lot of distressing information and he'd managed to grit his teeth and bear through it. Judging by the looks on their faces, it couldn't be good but he simply didn't know how much. 5 months. Chapter 98. Quote, a leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be, by Rosalind Carter. Naruto was used to hearing ridiculous things, most of them coming out of his mouth. He was no stranger to the unusual. Hell, he still remembered that time when he'd nearly been passed out for a week after trying to retrieve Sasuke from the Valley of the End. However, this easily took the cake for every insane thing he'd ever heard in his life. He looked at his mother and then he looked at Yura. The sorrowful, yet relieved expressions on their faces told him all that they had to, but he simply couldn't accept that. He thought he had to be under an illusion at some point, but that idea quickly dismissed itself when he realized that any of his summons or Kurama would have broken the illusion easily enough. But, how was he supposed to accept this? There was no damn way he'd been asleep for 5 months. However, before he could even throw out an outburst, almost like she was reading his mind, Kushina laid a hand on his chest. Yes, Sochi, it's true. You've been asleep for the last 5 months. Tsunade and numerous medics from every nation have been hard at work treating you. Yuri found us passed out and, you were bleeding from a ruptured stomach. It was because of the Shinigami mask. By all accounts, Otsutsuki Ashiki wielded the mask and was possessed by the Shinigami. Obito and the others then cut open his stomach. You took the damage as well and ended up like this. Amaru was able to keep you alive just long enough for Tsunade to get there. I woke up after a week. We visited you every day. I promise, Kushina explained. She took a breath for a moment and Yura took over explaining everything else. Even through his haze, Naruto made out all the necessary information. By tearing open the Shinigami's stomach, those sealed in the stomach of the Shinigami had become unsealed. Through the power of the Edo Tensei, they had returned to the land of living. They then somehow extracted Kurama from his father, Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage. There was so much information in so little time. The only time Naruto was given to process it was when Tsunade came bursting through the door. She quickly stepped forward with Karen right behind her. Naruto turned his head to them as the Godime Hokage stood next to his bed. Damn brat. You really know how to worry people, don't you? She asked, throwing a doctor's robe on her shoulders. Karen then stepped forward as well. You fucking idiot. You're gonna make me pull my hair out one of these days. The redhead growled. She still remembered how her body trembled when they brought her cousin in front of her. There was just so much blood. It just seemed like his stomach wouldn't stay stitched together. His wound would just open and blood would come pouring out. In fact, he lost so much blood that numerous medics thought about giving up on him already. He had drained her chakra numerous times as she tried to heal him. It was easily one of the most chakra-intensive treatments she'd ever administered. Being him, Naruto actually had a witty retort to both of them, but his voice was far too raspy to reply. He also felt very tired. He tried to keep his eyes open but it was done just long enough to see Tsunade usher out Kushina and Yura. The latter two kissed his forehead and left. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki's vision slowly started to dim before he felt the warm glow of Tsunade's mystical palm technique over his forehead. He then opened his eyes again as numerous doctors started to pile in. Tsunade barked orders to them all and footsteps ran to and fro, relaying and completing her orders without question. Karen lifted up his bedsheet and inspected the wound on his stomach. Medicinal herbs were rubbed on his body or injected into his body with a needle. Naruto couldn't even find the strength to be terrified of the needle. He was simply too tired. His life seemed like it was hanging on a damn thread. They poked and prodded him, shining lights in his eyes, checking his temperature, studying the rest of his body with whatever equipment they still had available from Konoha, and generally tried to keep him awake. Slowly, Naruto's condition had improved enough that Tsunade could dismiss everyone else. The Godime and Karen closed the door behind them and sat in chairs. Don't try to talk, brat. Like Kushina said, you've been down for the count a long time. To be honest, it's a divine miracle that you're even alive. The amount of blood you lost was enough to fill up 10 bodies. I don't know who's watching you, but you better start thanking them, Tsunade said before she finally sighed. She really didn't like seeing Naruto like this. R-Ray, LLY, FFF5, M-Mon, THS. Naruto groaned out. Tsunade and Karen sighed. I'm afraid so, Naruto. But try to relax for now. It won't do good for you to start worrying too much. It will take some time and physical therapy to get you back to where we need to get you. Luckily, your muscles haven't atrophied to a severe degree, especially since every member of the Uzumaki clan has been with your in-bed exercises. Now, that's enough for now. Let us work, Tsunade said. Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't in any state to offer a retort. He had numerous questions and absolutely no answers. However, at the very top of every question that he had, there was one that seemed paramount against the others. What happened to the Shinigami? 5 months earlier. Mother. Are you truly going to do nothing? You see into eternity. You know this was done under the hand of the false god. He is attempting to usurp your authority. He has always been trying to do that. Now, even our brother has fallen because of his machinations. Why do you not take action? Susanoo thundered as he slammed his fist on the table. Susanoo, you are out of line. Tsukuyomi fired back. Of course, the goddess of the moon agreed with him despite her chastisement. They'd been dealing with the false god for eons at this point. None of them doubted their mother's strength. So long as she desired it, she could rid them all of this annoyance once and for all. Yet, she chose to simply sit there while her children tried to help her keep her power and authority. None of them understood it. Amaterasu leaned forward. Mother, what aren't you telling us? You have allowed the false god to continue for much longer than you have allowed anyone. Please, what stays your mighty hand? The false god's disciples were even in the lower realm. The evidence is clear that they moved across to his will. Does it truly not concern you at all? Amaterasu questioned. Soon enough, all eyes were on Kami as she allowed her children to finish their interrogation of her. Given what she was putting them through, she figured it wasn't too much to allow them to vent their frustrations. Once they were all done, she opened her eyes. I am sure you all have numerous questions of me and wonder why I permit certain things. However, you fail to understand something crucial. You believe I allow these things to spiral out of control under their own chaos. I understand your concerns, but your fears are misplaced. To usurp my position is impossible. Even the false god is aware of this. You believe the false god wishes to claim my throne, my power, even my very nature. However, you must know that despite being older, none of you can see as far as Shinigami can. Fear not, for he knew this day would come, and such a day as this is crucial not just for him but for Uzumaki Naruto as well, Kami replied. The other gods looked at each other. The Shinigami's little pet summoner. What does he have to do with any of this? Susanoo asked. Rather than answer, Kami leaned back in her chair. Have none of you ever wondered why I haven't punished you all for interacting with the lower realms even when I forbade it? Kami inquired. The woman who reigned through eternity looked upon her children. They looked at each other clearly bewildered by her question. Much to Susanoo's embarrassment and anger, much of the gazes were directed at him. Despite Jashin's great punishment, he had a point that Susanoo had eons of history, fraternizing with mortal women. In fact, many of his children lay across numerous worlds. That Kami didn't get rid of them was mercy and grace enough for Susanoo. Yet, it did beg the question why she allowed such things. Please, regale us with your great wisdom, mother. Susanoo said before he was blown from the table and slammed into the wall behind him. Tsukuyomi, Amaterasu, Sujin, Reijin, Fujin, and others shivered in shock as Susanoo groaned. He tried to stand to his feet before his body was forced to the ground by insurmountable pressure. Susanoo gritted his teeth before Kami stood to her feet and walked over to him. I am willing to overlook that slight just this once, Susanoo. Act this way again and you will be joining Jashin in his punishment. See that you do not do it again, Kami warned as the ground crumbled. So great was the pressure that Susanoo couldn't even nod his head. He could only lay there in utter agony before the pressure was released. Susanoo panted and gasped as Kami turned around and walked back to her seat. Her other children watched her silently before she took a seat. The first reason is because you are my children. I am your mother. No parent enjoys disciplining their children. One of those reasons was because I simply allowed you your free will to make your own choices. Equally, you would be responsible for the consequences of those decisions. Susanoo, you have asked me numerous times to return the power that your many children have taken from you by their birth. I have not done so because that is your punishment for your disobedience. As for the second reason, Kami smiled as she saw her children on edge, wondering what her next words might be. Yet, much to their surprise, she didn't answer that. Instead, she leaned back on her throne and lifted one leg over the other. I shall provide you with an explanation simply because it is now time for you to know. The reason why I had not destroyed the false god was simply because Shinigami pleaded with me not to until certain matters came to pass. Of course, I knew what he was planning from the beginning. It was why I agreed to let things play out as they have. And, I have kept to my word that I would not interfere until he deemed my intervention necessary. For that reason, I am allowed to showcase how long I have held my wrath in check. Kami said, her eyes burning with furious fire and her voice like the deepest strikes of thunder. Her children weren't even allowed to fully comprehend her words before there came the sound of something being moved against its very will. Stars and celestial bodies shook violently. Everyone then noticed the very subject of their discussion standing next to Cammy. It was clear that even the false god hadn't the time to fully realize it. What is the meaning of this? The false god clamored, his starry eyes wide. He had been meditating as he had done for eons. In fact, he'd been aware of his victory in orchestrating the events regarding his followers and Otsutsuki Ashiki. While the stragglers weren't a part of the plan, they were still additional pieces that he could work with. He had been preparing to manifest himself before them all. Because the Great Will was a celestial being, he couldn't reveal himself haphazardly. He had to severely limit his power just so his disciples, his prophets, could comprehend his existence without their minds being shattered. Unfortunately, even after eons of learning, he still hadn't been proficient in doing that. It was why he did it so rarely, and why he never showed himself around Cammy or her children unless necessary. However, the startling thing was that he had been forcefully brought before them all, and he hadn't even been aware of it until it was too late. Just like he hadn't been aware of that hand that slammed into his face and crashed him into the side of the wall. Celestial bodies and violet outer storms roared as the Great Will felt every fiber of his being slowly erode into an abyss of nothingness. He tried to raise his hand, but his body was immediately pulled back and slammed into the wall again. Know this, Otsutsuki Shibai, I take no pleasure in the destruction of any being. Had you acted properly, I would have even permitted you to retain the fruits of your labors. Yet, you have mocked my authority, dealt deceitfully with my children, endangered my creations, and plotted against me for long enough. For your transgressions, I hand you your sentence. You shall become as nothing, for not even ashes shall be burned up and laid to waste. And your followers shall be used as steps for their enemy, Cammy said as Shibai snarled at her. He tried to raise his arm, or even activate the dormant divine energies within him, yet he was unable to, for Cammy had taken command of all of it. Her eyes narrowed while her grip tightened. I rarely raise my fist for any matter. Yet, you shall feel every measure, Cammy claimed as she blasted her fist into the Great Will's face. The walls shattered from the blow Cammy dealt as Otsutsuki Shibai crashed through another set of walls. He slammed into the floor before Cammy appeared behind him as he rolled. She then grabbed him by his throat and slammed him onto the floor. Shibai snarled as Cammy's children raced out to watch. They watched their mother stare down at the false god. I will not be the end. There will be many to take my place, many who will continue my legacy. You who see into the depths of eternity, know this to be true. The Great Will snarled out as he felt the very essence of his divinity, eons of Otsutsuki evolution and devouring of chakra fruit crafted from the lives of other planets. He'd worked so hard to make it to this point, even shedding his mortal coil in the process. Now, it was all being erased. Energy that he couldn't even begin to comprehend was being pressed upon him. All his power was being taken away. Shall I impart one last thing upon the Great Will before it passes into the vast nothingness? Cammy inquired, lifting Otsutsuki Shibai until his gaze was leveled with hers. She then tapped his forehead with her finger. With that tap, the will to fight, live, or even be, had left the Great Will's body. His body eroded away as if burning dust had blown away. He couldn't even stare into the eyes of Cammy like he used to. Her divinity was like the sun against a blade of grass, breaking his mind in an instant. Cammy released the false god and he burned away until nothing remained. Her children watched on as their mother straightened her dress and cleared her throat. She walked over the brief destruction and fixed every imperfection until everything was back to how it should have been. All of her children were silent as she boldly, yet gracefully stepped back into the room. She sat back on her throne and smiled. I trust you are satisfied with my decision? She asked. Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, Susano, and the others remained silent for a long while. It certainly seemed rather odd how decisively their mother had dealt with the problem after all of their complaints. Yet, with the false god taken care of, that led to another matter. Well, what about Shinigami? He is still recovering from the wound, Tsukuyomi clamored. Her little brother was always something of a pain with his attitude, but Tsukuyomi loved all her siblings. Some more than others naturally, but she never wished for a travesty to come upon them like one that came on her little brother. My son knew that this matter was coming and he asked for me to not interfere once again. He shall awaken when he deems it necessary. Fear not, His realm remains stable with Uzumaki Naruto as the anchor, which is why I have allowed this matter to play out. As for the false god's territory, I shall divide it amongst Sujin, Raijin, and Fuijin. They shall govern this area. See that you not follow in Jashin's footsteps. I am not above disciplining the three of you either. Especially you, Sujin, Kami warned. Her three sons swiftly nodded, bowing in the presence. Kami then dismissed her children and allowed them to go about their own affairs. She closed her eyes for a moment and spotted her son in his realm. He continued to float in the air, raising and falling as if in a deep slumber. After a moment, a smile graced her face. Uzumaki Naruto, be sure to not fail my son's expectations. He has quite a lot riding on you. Present time. Naruto looked out the window as the lands of his home. It had been 2 days since he had woken up and he'd been receiving visitors all day. He simply couldn't believe it. He'd been asleep for 5 months. 5 months he'd been unable to enjoy his marriage with his mother or continue professing his love for Yuri or Yura. He wondered how horrible his lovers must have felt without him being able to console them. Those were just 5 months of his life that he would never get back. And there was simply no answer as to why or how this happened. Oh sure, Naruto knew about that injury to his stomach that had been slit open. However, he always recovered quickly, even from injuries like that. Hell, Sasuke tore a hole through his damn shoulder when they fought back in the Valley of the End. He was no stranger to life-threatening injuries, but never anything like this. Yet, the strangest thing of them all was that he couldn't speak with Kurama or any of his summons. Well, it wasn't like last time when he fought Jashin. He could still sense them all, but it was like something was blocking communication with them. Well, it wasn't like Naruto didn't have an idea as to why. The Shinigami had warned him of the mask. As the summoner of the Shinigami, Naruto's power was directly tied to the god of death. The Shinigami had warned him of the mask. It was certainly very powerful, but all damage received to the host possessed by the mask would be transferred to the Shinigami, and that damage would also be transferred to Naruto. In fact, it looked a lot like the mask that covered his face whenever he lost himself to darkness that he hadn't gotten rid of. As Naruto understood it, Shino had betrayed them. No, it was likely that he was never with them to begin with. Yet, not even Naruto was aware of it. No one was. They let him so close because of Amaru. She trusted him, and why shouldn't she? He was the man who saved her life and the one who taught her everything that she knew. It was like Jiraiya betraying Naruto after the Kyuubi Jinchuriki had learned all he could from the man. Apparently, Kushina decided to defer punishment to Naruto. If he didn't wake up, Kushina would have handed out the punishment eventually. Circumstances aside, it was true that Amaru violated the rule that Naruto and Kushina had put in place. Everyone understood why, and it was clear that the guilt of the situation had been upon Amaru. For the last few hours, Naruto had also been thinking about that. As the clan head, it was his responsibility to enforce their laws. A punishment ought to be given. Even then, given Amaru's personality, she wouldn't have been satisfied with not being punished either. Being pitied was much worse than any punishment. Naruto knew that very well. Then there was the circumstances surrounding everything. He finally managed to digest all of the information. Akatsuki and Ashiki used the mosque's power to summon the 4 previous Hokage of Konoha, especially the Yondaime Hokage, his father, from the Shinigami's stomach. They somehow extracted Kurama from the Yondaime Hokage and sealed it into Ashiki. Before the Otsutsuki could do anything else, the 2 Otsutsuki that Naruto and Kushina had been fighting had taken Ashiki and the Akatsuki members away, but not before Sasuke could kill Kisame back in the cave. The chilling thought amongst it all was that Naruto had no idea how long Ashiki's plot had been going on. How long had he been preying on the civilian populace? Where had he gone when Jashin came upon the world? Where was he now? It wasn't like Naruto could just go to the realm of the gods and ask anyone there, especially not without the Shinigami. I think I'm starting to get why Shikamaru thinks everything's troublesome. It certainly feels like it sometimes, Naruto thought to himself. According to Tsunade, he'd begin physical therapy in a few days. Maybe it was the power of the Honshu working through him, but Karen and the doctors marveled at how fast he was recovering. It was even predicted that he'd be able to leave the constructed hospital in 2 weeks. Of course, he had to take things slow, but just that improvement was more than anyone was expecting, especially him. Naruto's thoughts were taken away when he heard a knock on the door. He turned his head and noticed the door open. To his surprise, he saw Hiyashi come through with a basket in his hands. Alright, he hadn't seen Hiyashi ever since he woke up. I see the rumors are true. You have finally woken up. It is good to see you in good health, Naruto-san, the leader of the Hyuga clan claimed as he closed the door behind himself. Yo, Hiyashi, I'd say it's been a little bit since we spoke, but I guess I'd be downplaying everything that part. How are you doing? Naruto asked, his tone a bit melancholy from taking in everything. Oh sure, he could get angry, but at this point being angry served no purpose. His body kept shaking when he tried to move and muscles weren't responding the way that they should. Even he realized he'd only end up hating himself if he did anything reckless. Besides, he'd have his lovers bearing down on him. That was just a death sentence waiting to happen, especially since he just came back from a coma. Hiyashi walked further into the room and took a seat next to Naruto's bed. Much better now that you're awake. You wouldn't believe how many of us lost sleep worrying about you. Hanako picked some fruit from the Hyuga clan's gardens, he said. Naruto smiled at the basket. Oh yeah, and what's it like being a father for a third time? Hanako-chan should be over a year old by now, huh? I might have missed her birthday, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki returned, a small smile on his face. Meanwhile, Hiyashi grabbed a small knife and began cutting some of the apples and oranges. It's one birthday. There will be more, Naruto-san. She is turning out just like Hanabi when she was younger. However, I would not trade this matter for anything. You have my thanks, Naruto-san, Hiyashi offered, expressing a sincere bow as he handed a plate to Naruto and set it on his lap. The blonde slowly reached for the pieces of fruit. Even holding those was taking some effort, but he managed to eat and savor the taste. Well, at least one thing is going right. So much for me keeping the nations under control. The first major threat and I'm left in a coma for 5 months. I have no idea what you guys must have gone through without me. If only I was stronger, none of this would have. Naruto-san, Hiyashi interrupted, getting the blonde to look at him. We all have things we can do with, if. However, there are no ifs. There is only what has happened. No one blames you. Rather, Kushina-san has been adamant that the two of you were having the fight of your lives with the Otsutsuki. You did what you could. Unfortunately, sometimes, doing all we can is not enough. If you wish to prevent things, then simply do what you can. If you have given all you have to give, and then given even more, then no one has the right to blame you. Look at us, the world is still moving. You've done fine, Hiyashi advised. Naruto opened his mouth and then closed it. He finally laughed. Thanks, Hiyashi. However, for once in my life, I'm dreading leaving this bed. I've missed so much, ya know. How am I even gonna catch up? The Uzumaki patriarch asked, biting into some of the apples provided to him. At this, Hiyashi leaned forward. That is why you have us. It will take time but things will return to where they should be if you are willing to work for it. And, before you answer, I know that you are. You are a young man who has always worked for it, whatever it is. You will be fine, Hiyashi answered. Though Naruto did not respond, he didn't believe he needed to. The smile on Hiyashi's face was enough for the both of them. Since then, they spoke for a couple of hours enjoying each other's company as friends. Both pleasant and unpleasant news was shared between them without secrets. They continued talking without caring for the time. The sun slowly began to set as the two friends slowly fell into silence. Naruto couldn't help laughing once more before a knock on the door came. Their conversation paused before the blonde saw Amaru come through the door. Immediately, the room turned into a tense silence and Hiyashi was more than aware to know the proper etiquette for a situation such as this. It was enjoyable speaking with you, Naruto-san. I hope we will be able to speak more in the future, Hiyashi said, dusting off his robe and standing to his feet. The Uzumaki patriarch turned from his cousin to his good friend and smiled. Yeah, that was awesome, Hiyashi. Tell Hanako-chan that I love the fruit. Tell her that she's welcome to anything from our gardens too. I know she likes the pomegranates that Yukimaru likes to grow. I'll see you later, Naruto assured, waving Hiyashi away as the man bowed. He then passed Amaru and touched her shoulder. Take solace in that Naruto-san is not a strict man by heart. You know this. He will not punish you unreasonably, Hiyashi expressed, hoping to comfort the young Uzumaki before he left. Amaru watched him go before she turned back to Naruto. His gaze remained even and she couldn't help feeling the guilt welling inside her. He was like this because of her, because she trusted in someone that she should have. Had the signs always been there? Maybe, but clearly, Amaru either ignored them or couldn't accept them. Now, she was reaping the consequences of her actions. She almost lost her cousin and their family would have gone through a greater grief than she knew how to comfort. It was then that Naruto realized that if this was going to go anywhere, then he'd need to be the one to do something. Amaru, come here, Naruto said. The young redhead lowered her head and her lips quivered. She slowly approached him, each step feeling like the weight of eternity pressing down upon her. She felt so ashamed of herself. When the clan heard that Naruto was awake, everyone quickly went over to see him, except for her. She hid away in her room when she should have been the first to go see him. However, she was too ashamed, too scared, too terrified of what she should say or what he would do. Her family tried to be there for her, but she shut them away. The sting of betrayal from her master simply allowed her no reprieve. The entire 5 months had been horrendous. She rarely ate and rarely slept. Yet, here she was. She wanted to make things right, even if it would cause her some measure of pain. She finally stood in front of Naruto. She shook, trembled even. A part of her wanted to just run away, yet the fear kept her in place. She would have liked it more if he just yelled at her. The long silence only made her thoughts fester. Amaru. Yes. The redhead jumped, throwing her head up in surprise. She shivered when she saw the blank look on Naruto's face before a smile formed there. He then laughed. Amaru, this is me, remember. I'm not going to eat you or steal your soul, Naruto remarked. At this joking nature, Amaru relaxed but only slightly. Well, I'm sure you could if you really wanted. Besides, I know I'm not only in trouble with you but with the Shinigami as well. I should have just asked if I could share the clan secret with Shino-sensei, but I didn't, and now, we almost lost you because of my mistake, Amaru replied, holding her head down. Naruto focused on the way she looked before he finally sighed. Yeah, I suppose I could, but not right now at least. Figuring some things out is such a headache. Anyway, why are you here? The blonde asked. Amaru looked up and opened her mouth. She then closed it and looked at Naruto as if he had grown a second head. Huh, well, you're gonna punish me, right? I figured we might as well get this over with, Amaru replied. She looked up again and noticed the mock hurt on Naruto's face. Oh, so I am in the clan head who gives out punishments. Is that what you think of me? Well, you might as well not call me Naruto. Why don't you call me punishment giver, since I'm just sitting here, handing out punishments to everyone who visits me? The blonde ranted rather childishly. It was enough to make even Amaru break out of her mood and offer a small smile. She quickly realized what the problem was. Alright, I get it, she said before she leaned over and hugged him. Naruto groaned out before Amaru jumped back as she watched him double over. Shit. Naruto, are you alright? I'm sorry. I'm so stupid. I should have. Ha 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 ha. Wow, you really fell for that one? He asked, laughing while Amaru gritted her teeth. Damn it, she'd beat Naruto to death if he wasn't bedridden at the moment. She was surely going to remember this. He wouldn't be in the bed forever. Ha. 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 Never funny. I was worried that I hurt you, you idiot. Amaru replied with a small growl, folding her arms in the process. Meanwhile, Naruto laughed a little more, feeling the need to lighten the mood. His ploy must have worked because Amaru started to laugh as well. The two Uzumaki shared their laughs until they slowly dwindled to a stop. Silence fell over the room again before Naruto offered Amaru a seat. She sat next to him and the blonde sighed. Amaru, did I ever tell you guys about Mizuki-sensei? The young clan head asked. Amaru thought to herself for a minute before she shook her head. I don't believe so, Amaru replied, her voice turning melancholy as the good times seemed to slowly end. She saw the faraway look on Naruto's face, almost as if the blonde had been replaying events in his mind that he really didn't like. You know, it was graduation day in Konoha. It was finally the day when I'd get my headband and become a shinobi for the village. It was the first step in my dream of becoming Hokage. I trained as hard as I could, and I thought I could take on the world. Unfortunately, I was the dead last, the worst of the bunch. Either way, to graduate you had to successfully complete one assigned jutsu, the Bunshin technique. It was an E-rank jutsu, a type that any kid should be able to get in a single try with any decent training. Everyone passed and was getting their headbands. It was my turn and I was pumped up, overjoyed even. I went in with all the confidence in the world. I thought nothing could stop me, Naruto answered, pausing for a moment. His silence made Amaru look up. She smiled weakly at him. I guess you wouldn't be telling me this story if you passed, huh? She inquired, chuckling to herself a little pitifully. Naruto didn't chuckle with her, but he did smile. Something like that. But anyway, I walked into that room and I did exactly as I trained. I casted the jutsu and my clone fell flat on its damn face. Needless to say, yeah, I failed. However, all didn't seem lost for me. Before I walked out, Mizuki-sensei, one of the teachers at the academy, vouched for me. He said they could make an exception since I'd taken the exam and failed 3 times. I think that was what made me gullible against him at first. Unfortunately, or fortunately depending on how you look at it, Iruka-sensei, the one who treated me fairly the most, rejected it. He said the others made it on their own efforts and without handouts. I failed, it was simple as that. You can imagine how much I must have felt. I did my best Sasuke impression and brooded on the academy swing set, watching as all the other kids got congratulated by their parents. Then came Mizuki-sensei with his damn award-winning smile. That smile was acted so well that even Koyuki-san would have believed it, Naruto claimed. Amaru continued to listen as Naruto recounted his past. She slowly started to get where this was going as she saw Naruto clench his bedsheets. Again, I think he laid the groundwork against me when he stuck up for me in the exam room. It made me trust him, only adding to the fact that he was a teacher. He took me away and we sat on a rooftop. He told me why Iruka had it out for me and I opened up to him, spilled my guts pretty damn badly too. And, I took the bait he laid. He gave me a chance to graduate by sharing a secret with me. Apparently, failing students could graduate if they managed to get the scroll of sealing and learn a jutsu from it by tomorrow. And yes, I was stupid enough to fall for that, Naruto remarked. Amaru gawked as she listened. While she'd never interacted with the scroll of sealing personally, she'd heard of it through the grapevine of discussing business with Konoha Shinobi. It was supposed to be some really powerful scroll with all the forbidden techniques in the history of the village. Sure, Naruto stealing it was ridiculous, but that he was even able to steal it at all was insane in and of itself. How did he pull that off? I stole the scroll and headed to a secluded part of the village where I learned the Kage Bunshin. I never believed in luck or fate, but even I think I had to admit that something was looking out for me because Iruka-sensei found me first. I was excited to tell him about my progress, that I had learned a technique, and passed the secret examination that Mizuki-sensei had for me. However, we were attacked by Mizuki-sensei. As it turned out, he hated me, loathed me, really despised me, perhaps even more than the village did. The man who was so kind to me, stuck up for me, cheered me up, got me to do what he wanted, and nearly killed me and my teacher in doing so. I managed to stop him, but I quickly learned that not everyone who gives you a warm smile has a warm heart, Naruto said, finally finishing his story. Amaru immediately realized what he was trying to convey to her through his story. He had experienced what she had. Perhaps he experienced it to a lesser degree than she did, but he knew what she was going through. He knew what she was feeling, and he knew what she needed most. Amaru, you will be forbidden from access to the clan's funds for a time. If you need anything, you will need to either ask Ka-san or me. You will also receive no pay for your medical work. You will work under Karen and all your projects will be handed to her. You will have her report to me daily on what you're doing. You can consider it volunteer work until your punishment is over. Lastly, you will take 5 dips in a spirit pool under the supervision of Ka-chan. You can either accept those punishments, or you can accept whatever the shinigami gives you whenever I see him, Naruto remarked. His tone wasn't harsh, but it was firm. He saw Amaru clench her clothes before she closed her eyes. I understand, clan patriarch. Thank you for your leniency, Amaru claimed. The punishment certainly stung, but it wasn't the worst in the world. Amaru was a pretty frugal spender anyway. Admittedly, not having the money was sad, and working under Karen even sadder. Karen was easily the most unhinged member of their family. Some might even call her a perfectionist when it came to her work. Amaru just preferred the term crazy. Still, she supposed that wasn't all bad. She wasn't sure the shinigami would be as lenient. Uzumaki though she was, she highly doubted the god of death would be so forgiving to her. I'll accept the first option, she replied meekly. Naruto turned to her and smiled. He figured as much. Well, alright then. Oh, and one last thing, you will take your shinobi training more seriously. Things have begun to slow down, even more so since I've been out of commission, so you have the time. Now this, I'm willing to let you pick, but you'd better take this seriously. If you don't, I will be more than happy to commission Bushibrow to come and teach you, Naruto remarked. Can I go back to the second option? Amaru asked. No, Naruto responded. Ah, there was the punishment. Thank you for letting me pick, she said, a shiver running through her spine. To be honest, it wasn't even the green jumpsuit that was making her resistant to the idea of Rock Lee. It was simply his extreme measures. She'd seen him do nothing but punch raw stone with his bare fists. He asked her if she wanted to join in. She remembered how bloody his knuckles looked. How could he do that with a smile on his face? Thank you for your leniency, clan patriarch, Amaru said with a quiver in her voice. Now there was the dreaded expression Naruto was hoping for. Yet, his firm tone took on a gentler one. Amaru, come here, he said holding out his arms. His cousin looked at him and frowned. I'm not falling for that again, Amaru grumbled. Naruto simply continued to hold his arms out and the latter finally relented. She cautiously leaned into Naruto and returned his hug. She then found him wrapping his arms around her. It's alright, Amaru, everything will be alright. So don't blame yourself. We forgive you, Naruto claimed. The redhead's face contorted in anguish before she silently sobbed into his cousin's shoulder. Her tears stained his shoulder as the mark of her past love, admiration, respect, and loyalty to her teacher and master, the one who had healed her and given her a purpose for living. She clawed at Naruto's back but he just held her and spoke not a word. He let her cry for as long as she wanted until she'd run out of tears to shed. When Amaru pulled back, she rubbed her face. Sorry, could you not tell anyone else about that? She asked. Naruto smiled, but he didn't laugh. It wouldn't have been the right time. Sure, you'll never hear a peep out of me, he answered. Amaru nodded, feeling a little ashamed of herself. She and Naruto spoke for a little while regarding all the time that he'd missed. It was, most certainly a lot, but even Amaru's visitation time had ended. Getting up, she bid Naruto goodbye. She would be there helping in any way to speed up his recovery. Though, it certainly seemed like his journey to wellness was already astronomical anyway. Still, even one day closer would be enough to ease her conscience. She left the room and Naruto watched her go. The next few moments passed as he was subjected to eating fruits, chopped vegetable soup, and pieces of bread. It wasn't the most appetizing thing that he'd ever eaten, but after 5 months of not eating, it was definitely nice to chew something. A nurse had just taken his tray away before he noticed Kushina, Yuri, and Yura come through the door. Hey, Naruto-ni, how are you doing? Yuri asked. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki grinned when he saw his lover's approach. Better now that my real dinner is here, he uttered, a large smile on his face. En-ni-sama. Yura stammered. She couldn't believe Naruto just said that, even if it did sound fairly exhilarating. However, it was clear to Yura that her little sister didn't have such problems. Carefully Naruto-ni, I haven't eaten in a long time either. I've kind of slacked on my protein intake, Yuri suggested. It was quick but Naruto saw the way the Sanbi Jinchuriki licked her lips. Yuri! Yura exclaimed before Kushina smacked Yuri over her head. The oldest redhead shook her head. Alright, that's enough out of you two, she motioned, even grabbing her husband's cheek and pinching it. And you seem to be doing fine if you're cracking jokes. Naruto's smile only got bigger as Kushina pulled the side of his face. What? I guess I have 5 months of compliments to make up for with the 3 of you. I love you, all of you. Plus, I have to joke or I'm gonna get crushed by my guilt of leaving you guys alone for so long, the blonde explained. Kushina slowly stopped her assault while Yuri and Yura felt their bodies shudder. The former of the 3 released her husband. Sochi, it wasn't your fault. Naruto held his head down. I know. But it's all I've been thinking about. Hiashi tells me that I shouldn't worry about the ifs. Even Amaru came by and we talked for a little bit. I know it wasn't her fault. Given how long she's known Shino, it's expected that if there were anyone she'd trust after us it'd be him. But, I can't help getting angry at myself. Shin warned me to focus on my training, but I didn't take it as seriously as I should have. If I was even a bit stronger, maybe the whole situation would have been resolved, and I wouldn't have put you guys through all of that. Instead, Ka-chan and I barely made it out. And now, I have no idea what's happening out there. And what I hate is that all I can say is that I'm sorry, Naruto explained, grabbing his bed sheets. When he'd had the time to recollect, the first thing Naruto imagined was the worry that he put Kushina, Yuri, and Yura through. He imagined how hard they had to work to make everything appear normal, never knowing if he would wake up or succumb to whatever had knocked him unconscious. He simply had no way of knowing how lonely they felt when they went to bed. He knew the pain of sleeping with no one to wake up to. It was a kind of loneliness that he'd never wished on anyone. With his head bowed, Naruto saw his lovers sit on the bed. Each of them held his hand. Naruto, yes, we were lonely, but we never stopped believing that you would wake up. Everything we did was so you could pick up where you left off. We watched, we waited, and we worked, and it all was worth it when you came back to us. And now, if you want to make it up to us, then get out of the bed and back to what you were doing, protecting us and watching the rest of the world. That is all we ask, Kushina claimed, offering him a small smile. Oh, and be sure to beat those guys if you see them again. Make them regret ever messing with us. Make sure you have a black eye for both of them. Yuri exclaimed. And you will not be alone, Ni-sama. We will be with you just as we always have. If you've messed up, then simply do it again. If anyone has a stubborn drive to correct mistakes, it's you, Ni-sama, Yura returned. Naruto looked at the three redheads and grinned. He then scratched his cheek. I don't deserve you. Any of you, he replied honestly. The three looked at him for a long while before Kushina leaned forward and kissed him unexpectedly. Yuri gawked while her older sister blushed. Hey, I was gonna do that. Yuri roared while Naruto's eyes widened. The warmth of his mother's kiss filled his tired mind and body, even more so as he took in the burning passion of her unleashed desires. He then realized that it had been 5 months since he got to enjoy this, 5 months since he'd ever kissed his mother, Yuri, or Yura. All of those thoughts seemed weird in and of themselves, yet he longed for them. Kushina pulled back and smiled at her son before giving Yuri a sly grin. You're too slow. Besides, I'm still his first wife. I should get the first kiss. Unless you think you can take it from me, the Red Death claimed, licking her lips while Yuri balled her fists. I won't lose to you. Yuri challenged, grabbing Naruto's torso. She then slammed her lips against his, even going as far as to pull his tongue in her mouth, and taking his breath with it. She deepened the kiss almost immediately, wrapping her arms around his neck. Naruto actually wondered if Yuri was trying to put him back into a coma. Oh, believe him, he preferred this way, but he was much too weak to contest with her. Luckily or unluckily for him, Yuri parted with a deep breath while Naruto fell back on his pillow, gasping for air while Yuri grinned at Kushina, the glint in her eye a challenge that the older redhead didn't like. The two glared at each other before Yura swallowed. She then took her place and grazed Naruto's chest with her hand. She then kissed him tenderly, panting into his mouth while Yuri and Kushina watched. Yura's kiss was noticeably more innocent in nature to Naruto, but Kushina and Yuri noticed differently. They saw the way Yura rubbed Naruto's chest, sensually moving her hands in a way that seemed to tease just the edge of reason for a mortal man. The smack of their lips was like pops of air in the silence, and the chilling heat of passionate breaths against their mouths. When they parted, it was with a pleasant sigh, almost likely a reprieve from an oasis in the desert. Yura touched her chest before she noticed Kushina and Yuri looking at her. What? Yura asked. The two then looked at their lover. The goofy smile on his face irritated them for some reason. Yura, nay, you're sneakier than I thought, Yuri muttered, biting the nip of her thumb's fingernail. Even Kushina was giving Yura a sideways glare, making her flinch with a tint of red on her cheeks. The three simply continued to stare at each other while Naruto tried to remove the flames of passion that smothered his brain from kissing three hot women. Alright, Ero Sennin, Naruto had to admit that he definitely loved doing that. Unfortunately, the passions had to subside for now and give way to a more serious talk. Kushina, Yuri, and Yura couldn't stay for too long as Tsunade and Karen's role as Naruto's doctors took authority on medical matters. They didn't have long and the sun had long since gone down. So, there was a lot of talking, especially regarding the shinigami. Much to Naruto's ease, Kushina, Yuri, and Yura easily maintained the might of the shinigami. That at least let Naruto know that their connection to the shinigami was fine. However, if that was the case, then why wasn't he able to manifest the shinigami's power like before? Sure, it could be because he was in less than proper form at the moment, but surely he would have been able to communicate with Kurama and the others. If Naruto and the shinigami sustained the same injury, then did that mean that something happened to Shin? There just seemed to be too many questions and not enough answers. However, suddenly, Naruto remembered something. Holding up his hand, the blonde looked at his right arm, where the shinigami summoning jutsu formula ought to be. Unfortunately, nothing was there. The blonde even tried pushing chakra into his arm to make it appear, but it never revealed itself. Kushina, Yuri, and Yura quickly recognized his concerns, noticing that the sealing formula was gone as well. That only led to more questions, which no one had the answers to. Finally, Kushina eased everyone's worries. I believe it would be best if we consider these circumstances later. Naruto, you're recovering and you don't need any more added stress. Rest for now, and we'll try and figure this whole thing out later. Promise us you won't do anything stupid. Kushina exclaimed, stabbing his chest with her finger. I promise, Kushina reiterated. Her son was always a stickler for never breaking his promises, especially to those he loved. Sure, it might be a little manipulative on Kushina's part, but she just knew that this investigation wouldn't cease if she didn't rein him in. He'd surely do something stupid if she didn't head him off at the pass. Naruto grimaced under Kushina's scolding glare. He looked to Yuri and Yura for help, but they were no different. All three of his lovers started at him disapprovingly, even though he hadn't done anything yet. I promise, though I think the three of you are exaggerating. I'm not that bad, Naruto criticized. Rather than a response, he was only given even harder glares than before. He opened his mouth and then closed it, sighing heavily. Alright, I'll just focus on recovering. I swear, Naruto urged, holding up his hands to placate his lovers. They looked at him sternly for a moment or two longer before they each kissed him on the cheek. They then got up and left him to rest now that visitation hours were over. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki was left alone as he looked at the ceiling. He continued to try and contact Kurama or any of his other summons. He tried as long as he could until his thoughts seemed to drift into the infinite expanse. It seemed so strange. After sleeping for nearly 5 months, the last thing he wanted to do was fall back into that never-ending blackness. Yet, his eyes were heavy and the weight of so much information made his mind tired. The gentle breeze of the air outside swept over his face as the smell of his home's fresh outdoors filled his nostrils. It was a very pleasant feeling. It seemed like yesterday that the stench of battle had come upon him. He closed his eyes and they stayed closed as the comfort of his bed and pillow lulled him into a deep slumber. He only hoped that when he woke up another 5 months wouldn't have passed. As the Uzumaki patriarch gave himself over to sleep, many potted flowers lay on the tables around him. All of them were given to him, wishing him a speedy recovery and congratulating him on finally waking up. Very soon, one by one, the petals of the flowers fell from their stem as they began to wither. All of them, once beautiful and vibrant, started to shrivel and die as the very essence of life was sucked from their bodies. They curled up until nothing was left except the pot and soil they'd been planted in. In the vast depths at the near end of the cosmos, Obito frowned as he stood to his feet. It had been a long time since he'd been living in this strange temple-like structure. Supposedly, they were going to get to meet this being who had enacted this plan and took them away. The two mysterious figures who grabbed them had long gone into seclusion without so much of a word. The worst part was that they couldn't even leave. The air was almost suffocating most days and downright impossible to bear others. What was even worse was that Otsutsuki Ashiki seemed to grow in both strength and arrogance the longer he stayed in this place. Yet, even more annoying than that was that it looked like the regent wasn't affected by the environment. In fact, he seemed to be perfectly at home within it. Even Zetsu was gaining strength. If that was the case, then why wasn't he growing stronger as well? What did he need that they all had? You are frustrated, Uchiha Obito, Black Zetsu said, coming up from behind him as the man had been looking out the stars and celestial bodies that seemed to defy all human reason and logic. The sight was enough to make even the most stubborn of men lose their reason. Yet, he managed to keep his. Perhaps his anger had kept him in check, or maybe there was something about this temple-like place that kept him sane. Either way, Zetsu's comment was as subtle as the floor beneath his feet. What do you want? He asked, giving off a rather low growl. Project Tsuki no Mi, it was in tatters. All the planning, all the deception, all the groundwork had been destroyed because he hadn't put that damn kunai through Minato's son when he had the chance. He had gone through with this plan because the regent had made valid points. As it stood, Uzumaki Naruto was simply too powerful for the Akatsuki and Obito to handle on their own. He needed external forces, yet those forces themselves seemed so far beyond him that he found himself accelerating their plans and not his own. The two beings have exited. They have called everyone to a meeting, Zetsu claimed. Obito's frown deepened. Wrong. It was all wrong. Why was it all wrong? Noted, he replied, not even bothering to turn around. He just continued to stare out into the vast nothingness as Zetsu turned around and continued on their way, leaving the Uchiha alone. Meanwhile, Zetsu arrived at the meeting location and opened the door. There was a large black table there. The material of the table was unlike any that the Zetsu had ever seen. Even the chairs seemed otherworldly. He saw the regent, Shino, and Ashiki already sitting there without much worry. However, Zetsu couldn't deny the shiver running through his body whenever Ashiki looked at him, especially with that menacing glare in his eyes. Zetsu took his seat and the three waited for their benefactors to appear. No one spoke a word to anyone else. It was fairly easy to see that none of them were friends, not even close. They had only been brought together by a common purpose. Things only seemed beneficial for them to act together at the moment. Zetsu heard two doors open. Immediately, Nanashiki and Nanashiki stepped through the door. All eyes were on them. Their presence was just as foreboding as always. Zetsu couldn't help but tremble with every step they took. Even with how much strength Zetsu had accumulated, it seemed like but a drop in the ocean of vast strength that these two Otsutsuki had obtained. What had they done to become so powerful? Where is the other human? We ordered for everyone, Nanashiki claimed, her voice laced with already growing irritation. Zetsu perked up at her question, cursing the involuntary shiver that ran through his body. Even just her speaking was enough to cause that, and yet Zetsu had no idea why even after all these months. He has been notified. It doesn't seem like he wishes to attend, Black Zetsu explained, drawing the irritating gaze of Nanashiki. Meanwhile, Nanashiki took his seat at the head of the table. It wasn't a request, Nanashiki said before the others felt a strange power circulate through her body. Immediately, Uchiha Obito found his throat in her hand. He snarled and trembled when he found himself met with her vicious, unforgiving gaze. He couldn't even find the strength to grab her arm in some vain attempt to get her to release him. He could only stand there as she looked at him. The next time you are ordered to attend, you will obey. Now sit down, you lower life form, Nanashiki growled, tossing Obito across the table and into the wall. The blow didn't even crash the wall, yet Obito was sure he felt something break as he fell to the ground. He snarled at Nanashiki as she took a seat next to her older brother. The Great Will has not answered our prayers nor our supplications. Suffice to say, but it would appear that the Great Will offered up his existence to continue his orchestrated plan. Nanashiki and I have always had a special connection to the Great Will. By his grace, we have always been able to perceive the smallest traces of his majesty. Now, there is nothing to perceive. For these months, we have been in mourning for the greatness that the Otsutsuki have lost. For now, we shall wait for a short time. Even we cannot fully comprehend every matter of the Great Will. If we are wrong, we shall attempt to further receive divine insight. If not, then we will move on and seek vengeance upon the ones who have deprived us of his excellency, Nanashiki spoke, his voice carrying a heavy weight throughout the entire room. Neither the regent, Shino nor Ashiki seemed perturbed by the information. Then again, that was expected since they had not been with the Great Will as extensively as Nanashiki and Nanashiki. So this was a waste of time then. What good are you if even your so-called god can be done away with? The two of you have done nothing all these months. Why should we entertain you further? Obito asked. Ordinarily, he'd be a lot more composed and regulated regarding these two. He obviously knew that he could not contend with them, yet, but the months of solitude were starting to get to him. The months of failed plans were starting to get to him. Everyone else seemed to be prospering but him. What was even worse was that he had a chance to do away with all of this and he'd stubbornly refused, hell-bent on obtaining the sweet lie he'd convinced himself to strive for in his grief. Nanashiki stood to her feet angrily before her brother raised a hand to stop her. She glared at him for a moment before she turned around and marched out the door, shattering one of the pillars on her way out. The pillar didn't even fall. It simply ceased to exist before she walked away. Uchiha Obito, your frustration is noted. However, you will watch your tone from now on. Silent or not, no one shall insult the Great Will while we are present. Your inferior ignorance is the only reason we will overlook this once. As for your matters, we have simply been judging which matters for you to undertake. Your ambitions are much too tied to your original world to be of particular use to us. We shall decide what to do with you. You may go back to what you were doing, Nanashiki claimed, snapping his fingers. Immediately, Obito was gone, which left the others in the room. Shino shook his head with a cruel smirk before he turned to Nanashiki. You're being quite harsh with him, the former teacher of Amaru claimed. Nanashiki ignored the lower life form and addressed Ashiki. If the Great Will truly has fallen, then we shall pull every resource into training you to ascend to the same plane of existence, the Otsutsuki prophet uttered. The transformed Ashiki looked at the Otsutsuki and frowned. Judging by your mindset, you should be Otsutsuki from a lower branch of the clan. Your choice is an adequate one, Ashiki mentioned. Nanashiki maintained a calm demeanor as the regent watched the exchange. Nanashiki and I are beyond such clan politics. Before the Great Will, all Otsutsuki are one. You simply possess what the Great Will was looking for. Had not she propagated with a lower life form, Otsutsuki Kagaya would have been a just as acceptable candidate, Nanashiki explained. Just the mere mention of Kagaya made Ashiki's chakra nearly spiral out of control. The stars around the temple gleamed ferociously as the floor beneath Ashiki's chakra splintered. His power swiftly began to rise as the space around them began to distort. It was then that Zetsu quickly realized that Ashiki knew the truth concerning them when he turned a severely harsh glare toward them. Black Zetsu quickly understood that its worry of Otsutsuki Ashiki was valid. Do not utter her name in my. Before Ashiki could finish his threat, Nanashiki waved his hand and all of Ashiki's chakra immediately vanished. His power plummeted like a stone in a watery abyss. Enough of your childish temper. It does not suit one selected by the Great Will. You clearly require greater training and even greater strength if you are to contend with the summoner of the Shinigami, Nanashiki claimed. Ashiki slammed his fist on the table. Uzumaki Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto. You speak of the lower life form as victory is still within his grasp. Have we not severed his connection to the god of death already? Has not the god of death been laid to slumber for eons since we have slit his stomach? Even you yourselves mentioned this curse that Kami would not interfere as punishment for her son creating this mask. What more need be done? He has nothing, Ashiki exclaimed, his fists tightening. He couldn't believe they were even still having this discussion. They could take care of Uzumaki Naruto whenever they wished. In fact, why were they hiding like this? If they were so worried, then they should just go and kill the lower life form now while he was weak. Remove a king's crown, his throne, his kingdom, his people, and even his royal blood, he is still a king. The role granted to the king was not chosen haphazardly. In fact, you might say there is no other actor upon this glorious stage who can perform this role than him. Think of the countless beings across worlds who have existed before us. How many may claim that they have garnered the interest of a god? And not just any god, the god of death, rumored to be the most hardened, inflexible, reasoned, and dutiful deity amongst the hierarchy. What should that tell you about the king? The regent inquired. Ashiki said nothing, looking at the man in the mask before the regent reached into a subspace and pulled out the Shinigami mask. It was an item that all in the room had become familiar with, yet 3 of the 5 were rather stunned when the mask showed signs of severe decay, cracking from the slightest touch. We shall not be able to use this method ever again, and we have incurred the wrath of one of the oldest of Kami's children. Why would this god choose the king of all beings? It is simple. The king has a better role than even he knows. And the reason Kami allows us our way is because she trusts the outcome. The most powerful of our troop would be obstructed by her children now that they have been discovered. And, no one here can best the king's queens. It requires much more. It is impossible to vanquish the king now, the regent explained. And why, pray tell is that? Ashiki asked. Behind his mask, the regent's light blue eyes gleamed momentarily. Because, his ascension has already begun. To combat him, we must stand on a stage higher. The next act must commence, the regent uttered. There came silence around the table. The only sound being heard was that of the breaking shinigami mask. Finally, Shino leaned forward. And how do we enact this, next play? He questioned, a sinister grin plastered on his face. The regent turned to him and his blue eyes gleamed once again. Finally, the shinigami mask crumbled into 1,000 pieces. Amaru stepped through the door to her clan's compound and closed the door. The weight of the day came down upon her as she was handed her sentence from Naruto. The worst part of it all was working under Karen. Yet, compared to everything else, that was actually relatively tame. She had to find herself a taijutsu teacher. She had never been good at fighting, and that was probably why she found herself caught off guard by her former teacher. Once she stepped through, she noticed Yukimaru in the courtyard, practicing the clan's techniques under the supervision of Tayuya. They seemed to be finishing up as Yukimaru panted, wiping the sweat from his forehead. Thanks, Tayuya-ne, he panted, smiling in that way that made it impossible to be harshly critical of him. Yeah, just go hit the bath already. You stink, Tayuya muttered, ruffling his long hair before the two noticed Amaru standing there. The fuck's wrong with you? You look like you've been put through the ringer. Unless the shithead finally got you with some well-deserved punishment, Tayuya taunted, even though there was hardly any malice in her words. She never told anyone, but she'd gone to visit Naruto every day ever since she learned that he'd fallen unconscious. Once everything was settled, she remembered breaking Amaru's nose back at home. She apologized the next day, but the whole family definitely felt her anger. Of course, some of it was directed at Amaru but most at Shino. She was gonna make that fucker pay or die trying. Amaru looked at her cousin and Yukimaru. She then resigned herself to her fate. Do you know where Karen is? I kind of work for her now, Amaru commented. There was silence in the training area for a moment before Tayuya burst out laughing. She fell on the ground and cackled boisterously as Amaru's cheeks turned as red as her hair. Tayuya-san, don't laugh. Yukimaru chastised rather weakly as the redhead ignored the youngest member of the Uzumaki clan. She just continued to holler in laughter before a hairbrush slammed into her head. Tayuya, shut up. I can't focus on my seals with you laughing like a Sarutobi clan monkey. Fuka shouted from the window in her room before she slammed it closed. Tayuya swiftly grabbed the brush and scowled. Say that to my face, you fucking bitch. Tayuya fired back, snapping the brush in her hand. Yukimaru tried to mediate between them even though Fuka had long since distanced herself from the ravings of her cousin. Tayuya continued to spout out all kinds of unholy obscenities before Yukimaru turned to Amaru. Sorry, Amaru-ne. We haven't seen Karen-san. You can try finding her in her room or her lab. You know she sometimes likes to spend her time in either of those places, Yukimaru commented. Amaru nodded and walked off, set on finding Karen. In hindsight, she supposed she should have looked around the makeshift hospital where Naruto was staying, but Karen was never one to loiter in one place. Besides, it was nighttime. Naruto would most likely be sleeping and she would be in the locations that Yukimaru mentioned. As it turned out, Karen was in one of those two locations. Amaru just hated that it had to be the one that was the furthest away. She found Karen in her lab, sitting there at a desk as she continued to examine the remains of the battle from 5 months ago. Karen, Amaru called. She heard her cousin suck her teeth before she pushed herself off her desk. Fucking, I said I didn't want to be dis. The former associate of Orochimaru ceased her tirade when she saw her younger cousin standing in the hallway. She took off her glasses for a moment. Amaru, it's late and I'm busy. What is it? Karen asked, turning back to her work. Amaru stepped further into the room and closed the door. She finally sighed. I had a bit of a talk with our clan patriarch. I am being punished for my mistake and I will be working for you in the foreseeable future. I'm also to hand over all the projects I was working on to you, Amaru explained. Karen stopped writing in her notebook and turned to Amaru. The two exchanged glances before the former set down her quill. She stood up and stood to her feet. Damn, Naruto's really pushing you hard, isn't he? Well, don't expect me to go easy on you just because we live in the same house. Believe me, you're gonna want to get far away from me when Naruto lets you go. Fine, you can get in here and start helping me research this stuff. You might wanna bring some toiletries. We're gonna be busy here, Karen warned. Amaru's shoulders slumped. And, I don't need to be paid. I'm doing it for free, Amaru said, a shuddering running through her face. Her visage worsened when she saw Karen's eyes glowing. You're working for me, and it's free labor. I'd fucking kiss Naruto if I could. Karen laughed as she pushed Amaru inside. Dear Kami, please let this punishment go by quickly. Amaru was already starting to regret it. On Chapter 99. Quote, greatness lies, not in being strong, but in the right using of strength, and strength is not used rightly when it serves only to carry a man above his fellows for his own solitary glory. He is the greatest whose strength carries up the most hearts by the attraction of his own, by Henry Ward Beecher. Sasuke opened his eyes and leaned up from his bed. He heard Yuna groan as she turned over in their bed. She pulled the covers over herself as the male Uchiha wiped the sleep from his eyes. Perhaps rather uncharacteristic for him, he leaned over and kissed Yuna's cheek. Her face scrunched up, yet the smile on her face was obvious before Sasuke swung his legs and stepped out of the bed. He never liked leaving without letting her know, but he wanted to get to the hospital early. It had been a week since the Dobi had awoken and he was flooded with guests constantly. He was also flooded with gifts. The hospital staff and even some of the Hyuga clan had been recruited to handle them all. Of course, it wasn't like Sasuke really cared whether the idiot died or not, cause he didn't. He just wanted to laugh at his teammate for falling asleep like that. Yeah, definitely that. Either way, Sasuke got dressed and washed up in the bathroom. Once he stepped out, he passed by his mother's room and stiffened for a moment. With Naruto waking up, it felt like all the time suddenly came back to him. It had been 5 months and that had been more than enough time for him to recognize things. Things that he simply wasn't sure how he was supposed to handle. Emotionally stunted though he was, Sasuke had received female attention for a long period of his life in the academy. Even from some foreign women in diplomatic assignments back when he was a member of Konoha's shinobi force, he received attention. While it was annoying more often than not, especially since it never benefited him in obtaining his vengeance against Itachi, it had always been his dream to rebuild his clan. Obviously, he needed a woman, a wife, for that. He'd been in the throes of puberty as well. Where was Sasuke going with this? He knew when a woman was interested in him. He also knew when one was flirting with him as well. At first, he just thought his mother was being strangely clingy. He didn't mind it so much since he'd been without her for so many years, but all the signs certainly seemed there, and the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. The only question he couldn't answer was, why? Of course, he couldn't deny his mother's beauty either. He still remembered the embarrassing shower circumstances that seemed to happen at every opportunity. Even Sasuke could see it, and that only made him remember what he told Yuna all those months ago. He'd been honest with her about his attraction to his mother. The other problem was that the tells had been so obvious that even Yuna noticed them. Yet, she never said anything. She would just give him a knowing smirk and walk off. What the hell was that supposed to mean? He simply didn't know what he was supposed to do with all this information being presented to him. Surely if Yuna had a problem with this, then she would just say something. If there was one thing Sasuke liked about Yuna, it was that she spoke her mind without hesitation. Was she giving him a sign that she was fine with it? Or was she testing him? Either way, Sasuke couldn't let it settle like this. As a man, he would have to be decisive. Both with Yuna and with his mother. If he was wrong, then he could handle the misunderstanding. He had made them before. However, if he was right, then. The Uchiha shook his head and pinched the bridge of his nose. Dobi, if you weren't recovering I would beat you over the head right now, Sasuke grumbled as he left his mother's door and went into the kitchen. He picked an apple and orange for himself and made his way toward the front door. As he opened it, he noticed Itachi coming through the door with a towel wrapped around his neck. Ah, good morning, Sasuke, Itachi said. Sasuke looked at his older brother and noticed him sweating. It seemed that he'd been training very early. Sasuke had already planned to go about his own training after he visited Naruto. Morning, Seems like you've been busy, Sasuke remarked. Itachi used the towel to wipe his face. Yes, though these months have been peaceful, we must remain cautious. We're still missing a lot of information. Do not forget that the Akatsuki are still out there. We must always be prepared, especially given what they pulled off those months ago. And where are you going? Itachi inquired. Sasuke's eyes narrowed. He hadn't forgotten about the Akatsuki, the Otsutsuki, and what they had done. They were indeed out there with the 4 previous Hokage of Konoha. They had also managed to seal the Kyuubi inside Otsutsuki Ashiki. That said, the explanation Kushina gave only made the circumstances much more dire. I'm aware. However, no one knows where they are. Even Kushina can't find them. Likely, they aren't even on the planet anymore since those other Otsutsuki took them away. Well, I'm sure the Dobi's got a plan now that he's awake. I'm gonna go see him now, Sasuke explained. The younger Uchiha didn't know why, but the smile on his brother's face made him angry for some reason. What? He asked, his face twitching in irritation when he saw Itachi's smile only grow wider. Nothing. Wish Naruto-sama a swift recovery for me. Also, please address your other matter. You shouldn't toy with an expecting heart, Sasuke. I thought you of all people would know that, Itachi said before he poked his brother on the forehead. Unfortunately, that only served to irritate his younger brother as Sasuke smacked his hand away. Stop treating me like a little kid. I'm going. Sasuke replied with a scowl, marching down the road which Itachi entered the house with a small chuckle. While Sasuke walked down the road, he soaked in the vibrant sun. The smell of the ocean was upon the land as he marched toward the hospital. If there was one thing Sasuke had to say for Uzushiogakure, its forests and landscape were very beautiful. Not even Konoha had such green forests and well-kept roads like this. Then again, a lot of carpenters, road workers, and more had been coming into the nation. Of course, much of the populace wanted to be near the summoner of the Shinigami. The land was profitable for business and trade. Progress happened here faster than almost any other nation, and with good reason. Ink had been produced numerous months ago. As always, Uzumaki ink was of the highest quality, and along came the steady circulation of paper, wood, ore, and materials. The era of craftsmen, trade, and commerce was what some people called it. It was said to rival even the age of shinobi, yet it all revolved around one man, Uzumaki Naruto. Sasuke continued walking as he passed by a host of Hyuga, each of them smiling and laughing as they wore Uzushiogakure headbands. It seemed so hard to believe that the stoic Hyuga clan would show such a wide range of emotions. Granted, that was rather amusing coming from Uchiha Sasuke of all people. Either way, it was clear that some things had changed. The land was notably more cheerful now that the Dobi had woken up. As Sasuke walked, he noticed 2 individuals heading in the same direction along a different route. It was fairly to identify them as he swiftly approached. I see I'm not the only one going to visit Naruto, am I? Sasuke asked as the 2 turned their heads. Wow, it seems having a girlfriend has truly mellowed out the stern Uchiha Sasuke. To think you'd be visiting people. Should I expect you to start planning romantic dinner dates and moonlight strolls through the night? Yugao asked while Kakashi smiled. Uchiha Sasuke wasn't quite so amused as his glare hardened at them. Shut up, he responded much to Yugao's amusement. In her hands was a pot of flowers for her former teammate. Ever since she'd heard that he woke up, she wasted no time getting into Uzushio. Kakashi came with her, eager to see his former student as well. Mama, let's not start killing as soon as we see each other. How have you been, Sasuke? Kakashi inquired. The one-eyed Jonin had been one of the first people on the scene when the cage arrived. He still remembered seeing Naruto's unconscious body, and the fear of what happened to Minato and even his own father remained a constant fear in his mind. Even with Rin's help, he'd had a lot of trouble sleeping. He would have come sooner if not for having some work to do, yet in those 5 months, Kakashi had visited Naruto many times. He always hoped that he'd be there when Naruto woke up, but just having the blonde awake at all was more than enough. Sasuke looked at his former teacher before he sucked his teeth. I'm fine. The investigation hasn't gone anywhere from that incident all those months ago. However, we still plan to keep searching for anything that we can use, Sasuke answered. Kakashi and Yugao nodded as the 3 saw the hospital in the distance. Yes, Rin's joined in every search that she could to find Obito. If not for Naruto, I have no doubt she'd be out there with you in the investigation. I've tried to stay with the pursuit, but she gives me updates, especially since I've been assigned to journey with Tsunade-sama on her diplomatic assignments. Yugao, would you mind switching with me? Kakashi asked. No, Yugao returned as they made it to the hospital. They entered the building but noticed almost no one was around. They stepped through the building and they heard nothing but silence. Where is everyone? Yugao asked. Kakashi and Sasuke glanced at each other before the latter sensed a bunch of chakra signatures about a mile or two away. The trio walked out the back of the hospital and into the fresh overgrowth of the Uzushiogakure forests. The further they went, the further they started to hear a distant rumbling. Yet, there didn't seem to be any chaos brewing, so there didn't seem to be any reason to be anxious. As they approached, they finally spotted Tsunade, Sakura, Karen, Amaru, and a host of medic nin in the plains. All of them looked stunned and downright flabbergasted as they continued to look forward. What are they looking at? Yugao inquired. No idea, but I'm sure we'll find out if we draw closer, Kakashi said. Sasuke's eyes lowered as he marched through the medics. Each of them stepped aside when they saw him. Kakashi and Yugao weren't far behind him as he approached Sakura. What's going on? Sasuke asked. Broken from her gaze, Sakura turned to see Sasuke approach. Sasuke-kun, Sakura exclaimed as she also saw Kakashi and Yugao approach behind him. Sakura then registered her former teammate's question and looked back with a sort of half chuckle. Well, it was time for Naruto's checkup and, Sakura drawled off as she looked back at the plains. Sasuke, Yugao, and Kakashi followed her gaze before their mouths slowly when they saw Naruto, the Uzumaki Naruto, lifting a massive block of stone like he was lifting weights. In fact, he was doing it one-handed with a wide grin on his face. Yo Ba-chan, you writing this down? Naruto asked with a large grin on his face. He then stood up and threw the large block of stone through the air. It flew and flew and flew until no one could even see it anymore. All the while, everyone watched the young man who had been on the brink of death for nearly 5 months suddenly gain the largest burst of energy that anyone had ever seen. A body that looked like a withered husk was now ripe with strength every which way. Even Yugao couldn't resist the slight flush on her cheeks when she looked at her former teammate. The first one to get over their shock was Sasuke as he stepped forward. I guess it's true what they say, idiots do recover quickly, the Uchiha commented. A flash of irritation moved past Naruto's face before he turned to Sasuke. Are you really trying to pick a fight already, Sasuke? Naruto growled. The two looked at each other for a long while before they finally smirked. Sasuke looked down momentarily and saw the ground lightly splintering beneath Naruto's feet. It was like the ground couldn't even properly contain all the power radiating from Naruto's body. Yet, Sasuke didn't sense anything impressive. It was like Naruto wasn't even there in the first place. If the Uchiha wasn't looking at his teammate with his own eyes, he'd almost think that Naruto wasn't there at all. Please, Dobi, I've had 5 months of training over you. For the sake of your title, I won't embarrass you in front of everyone, Sasuke claimed. The two former members of Team 7 looked at each other for a long while before they gave each other a firm handshake. Whatever the hell you did, make sure you don't do it again. You've given everyone enough worry, Sasuke uttered, gripping Naruto's hand even tighter. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki smirked but he offered a resolute nod. Count on it, he answered before the two let go of the handshake. Naruto then walked past Sasuke while the Uchiha watched him go. The smirk on Sasuke's face then fell as he looked down at his hand. His face then contorted in sheer pain as he felt the bones in his hand break. He clenched his hand, trying to squeeze away the pain and keep his face even. As he did, the pain simply kept escalating as he strained the rest of his body. What the hell happened? I feel like I just shook hands with the damn Godime Hokage. How did the Dobi receive this much strength in such a short time? Sasuke thought to himself. He looked back at Naruto as he walked over to the others. I told you, Ba-chan. I'm fine, Naruto urged as he sat on the ground while Tsunade and Karen looked him over. If this were any other time, I would absolutely argue with you, brat, the Godime Hokage responded as she checked his entire body. Unfortunately, based on all the tests, all the numbers, all the signs, there really was nothing wrong with him. Hell, he was in better than any human she'd ever studied before. Not even Karen or Sakura could find something wrong with him. Such a recovery was impossible. Even when he'd been contracted with the shinigami before, Naruto was never able to bounce back on his feet this fast. Tsunade was determined to find something wrong if for no other reason than to correct her currently deteriorating medical expertise. Yet, she couldn't find a single thing. And, neither could Karen, Sakura, or Amaru. Suffice it to say, but Naruto was as healthy as an ox. No, perhaps even 1,500 oxen. Tsunade opened her closed her mouth before she was finally forced to sigh. Well, it's not like I can keep a damn healthy person in a hospital. You're clear to go, Naruto. However, I want you to take it easy for a few days and come back for regular checkups for the next 2 months. Think you can do all that? Tsunade asked. Naruto looked at Tsunade evenly. I think I can manage that, Naruto retorted. He was fine with some thinking he was an idiot. After all, he was well aware that he'd done plenty of dumb things in his life. But it wasn't like he was stupid. He knew all of the strange things happening with his body. He was simply in a hurry to test them out for himself without getting everyone involved. He felt it when he broke Sasuke's hand with just a simple handshake. Given that Sasuke tried to play it off, Naruto also sought to not make a big deal out of it. Being given the confirmation that she needed, Tsunade, Sakura, and the rest of the medic nin left the area, each more bewildered than the last. Naruto watched them go before Karen and Amaru walked over to him and hugged him. Naruto, you're a fucking freak. But you're an alive freak. I don't know what the hell's going on with you, but we're glad you're alright. Karen said. Amaru vigorously nodded as she hugged her cousin, almost tighter than Karen. She was well aware it was her own fault that her cousin nearly died. Granted, he died plenty of times before, but this was by far the scariest. She hugged him as tight as she could, tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, Naruto slowly embraced his cousins. He tried hard to control his strength as he definitely didn't want to snap them in half. He felt like he could at a moment's notice. He returned their affection as much as he could before he saw Yugao and Kakashi smiling at him. More women, Naruto. A man should learn to be more disciplined, Kakashi said, giggling as they approached. Yugao nudged him in the stomach while Karen and Amaru widened their eyes. They quickly ripped themselves away from Naruto, rubbing down their bodies. Ah, don't joke like that. Karen grumbled as she rubbed her shoulders. Oh sure, Naruto was rather handsome. Not exactly, Sasuke, handsome, but he was definitely up there. However, Karen wasn't really the sharing type. Though, if that short honeymoon was anything to go by, maybe it wasn't that bad. Amaru watched Karen vigorously shake her head before she stomped off. Well, I should go follow her. Karen's gonna be working me to the bone for a while, Amaru said, walking after Karen. She waved goodbye to them all while Yugao drew close to Naruto. It's good to see you awake, Naruto. You really know how to make everyone worry about you. We visited a handful of times, but it's nice to see that goofy expression on your face, Yugao joked, lightly laughing when Naruto looked at her strangely. What goofy expression? This is just my regular face, he asserted. He didn't like it when Kakashi, Sasuke, or Yugao started laughing at his confusion. Somehow, he was thankful that he couldn't hear Kurama or the others. He had no doubt they would be laughing at him. Nevertheless, Naruto allowed them their time to laugh before his expression turned serious. He turned to Sasuke. Sasuke, tell me your side of all the things that happened in the past 5 months, Naruto announced, his voice radiating with a strength that made the 3 shinobi shiver. They each looked at each other before they nodded. Unfortunately, if Kushina told you everything, then there's not much else we can add to give you more information. We've been sending the best of our trackers to find Obito and the rest of Akatsuki, but there hasn't been a single sight of them. We've even sent out the Uzumaki clan and spread ourselves pretty thin for at least 3 months. In that time, we were forced to conclude that they are most likely not on Earth anymore, Sasuke said. Kakashi and Yugao then addressed the matter. We have tried to collect information from the civilians and victims of the kidnapping done under Otsutsuki Ashiki, but they don't seem to remember too many things. Luckily, Ino and the Yamanaka clan helped with recovering lost memories. Unfortunately, it didn't provide much insight save for traitors to the elemental nations. It was a lot of cleanup, Yugao claimed. How? The Kyuubi Jinchuriki inquired. It seems that some were trying to undermine the efforts of the elemental nations. These people were this way even before the events of Jashin. Yet, we've been able to snuff most of them out. You can never know if they're truly gone. Still, now that you're awake, I think people will start breathing a little easier, especially if Obito and Ashiki have left. We heard from Kushina what preoccupied you both. It seems that there are even stronger Otsutsuki than we believed. Still, one of the members of their main branch is working with you. Did they not acknowledge her? Kakashi asked. Naruto frowned. It seems not. Though, it doesn't look like Kagura held them in high regard either. Though, if they can get that powerful, then it's better if the rest of the Otsutsuki don't realize it. If they do come back here, they will no doubt be stronger, the blonde said, sending another shiver through the others. Sasuke clenched his fists. In that case, we need to get you and the others in that damn pool. Kushina, Yuri, and Yura have been going nearly daily after Kushina woke up, Sasuke announced. Naruto quickly nodded. He could already tell that much when he saw them. It was clear that they had grown more powerful in his unconscious absence. Yeah, I know. I'm actually going to start tomorrow. I would do it today, but there are some things I want to do. Kakashi-sensei, when you and Yugao have the time, tell Ba-chan that all cage summits will be held in the underground pools. As Sasuke said, I didn't heed Shin's advice. If I had taken it seriously, maybe we wouldn't have been in this predicament, Naruto commanded. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki then turned to Sasuke. Also Sasuke, until Shin says otherwise, I'm gonna make something of an executive decision. You guys can use the pool as well. Use it carefully. If it's too much for you, then don't bother, but it's clear that we're not as peaceful as we appear to be, Naruto uttered. Kakashi, Yugao, and Sasuke shifted their gazes toward each other before the Uchiha nodded. You don't have to worry if it will be too much for me. Just don't be scared if I surpass you in it, the young swordsman tested, getting a light glare from Naruto. Kakashi and Yugao sighed to each other before they smiled. Some things never changed. Also, Naruto, Sasuke said quietly. Naruto turned to his friend and saw the heavy blush on Sasuke's face. To use his real name instead of mocking him, let the blonde know just how serious his friend was taking the issue. That he also did it quietly let Naruto understand that this was clearly something Sasuke didn't want Yugao nor Kakashi to know. What is it? Naruto asked. Sasuke clenched his teeth in his fists before he shifted his gaze to the patriarch of the Uzumaki clan. I need some advice, Sasuke said. Okay, now this threw Naruto for a loop. What thing would be so strange, so dire, that Uchiha Sasuke needed Uzumaki Naruto's advice? Alright. What is it? Naruto asked. The embarrassment threatened to overwhelm the Uchiha clan heir before he exhaled carefully. He then grabbed Naruto's arm and whispered in his ear. Kakashi and Yugao watched the exchange before seeing Naruto's eyes widen further. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki sent a look to Kakashi, and the Jonin could tell when someone wanted to be alone. After all, he'd been quite the master of that look. Come, Yugao. Now that Naruto's awake, I've been looking to find some Uzushio cuisine. I can tell you've been trying to find some too, Kakashi mentioned. Yugao barely even had time to register Kakashi before he dragged her off. What the, Kakashi, I can, is this some stupid guy thing? Yugao asked as her former Anbu leader led her away. She wanted to stick around and find out this weird secret. After all, how long had it been since she had dirt on Uchiha Sasuke of all people? Besides, she wanted to spend some more time with Naruto. She did not travel all this way just for a brief hello. Damn it, Kakashi-senpai. Yugao roared as the two former Anbu walked away, leaving Naruto and Sasuke alone. Once they were, the blonde turned to his friend. Really? You? Now who's the copycat? Naruto asked. Shut up and help me, idiot, Sasuke growled before Naruto's face evened out. He looked at Sasuke in a way that the Uchiha just knew that the blonde would finally take this seriously. He saw Naruto look up at the sky for a long while before he turned back to him. It's a long walk to my house, Sasuke. Come with me. During that walk, I'm gonna give you everything you'll need. All you have to do is trust me. And please, when you do this, don't be, well, you, Naruto replied, making Sasuke growl before they started walking. It seemed so strange to Naruto when he looked up at the Uzumaki clan compound. For him, it had been only a few weeks since he'd last stepped inside these walls. Yet, months passed. Time passed and he'd been in bed unaware of everything. So far, his responsibility as a marriage partner was at an all-time low. He would have to make it up to his mother, Yuri, and Yura. Additionally, he had to find out what happened with the shinigami in his body. Hopefully Tsunade kept her medical discretion and didn't inform too many people about the changes. He had just woken up and he had too much to catch up on. Do that, Sasuke, and you'll be fine, Naruto replied as he looked at Sasuke. It took his whole nerve to not burst out laughing when he saw the massive blush on Sasuke's face. The Uchiha looked at the Uzumaki clan patriarch with the most embarrassed and skeptical look on his face. You're messing with me, aren't you? Sasuke asked. There was no way this was gonna work. Sasuke, it will work. It won't work if you don't believe it will. It just takes that first step. If it makes you feel any better, you can just tell Yuna-chan your plans. I know you're a brooding bastard, but you can't just glare this problem away. Make your move or don't, but don't blame your mother if she does decide to move on, Naruto claimed. Sasuke opened and closed his mouth several times before he simply walked down the road, away from the Uzumaki compound. Naruto watched him go with a small smirk. Turned out Sasuke was a rather shy guy. The blonde realized he was learning a lot more about his friend than he ever wished. No matter how funny it was. Either way, once Sasuke was gone, Naruto looked at his home and opened the door. Once he stepped inside, he noticed the large living room. It was entirely bare. There wasn't a sound anywhere. However, he couldn't help a small smirk on his lips as he stepped further into the room, seemingly unaware. In hindsight, maybe he shouldn't have tried sensing for everyone. He thought they might all be out of the house tending to their duties. After all, Karen had walked off with Tsunade not too long ago. Yet, he sensed her hiding behind the wall. While his abilities as the Shinigami's summoner had mysteriously disappeared, his natural Uzumaki proficiency hadn't. He took one more step forward when a ring of party poppers exploded right in his face. The smile on Naruto's face widened as a large tarp fell from the ceiling. Every single family member then rushed out of their hiding spaces. Congratulations on your recovery, Naruto. Everyone shouted. Shien, Komachi, Guren, Fuka, Yukimaru, Amaru, Karen, Kushina, Yura, Yuri, Riza, Tayuya, Karen, Samui, Omoi, and Atsui greeted him. Yuri quickly charged at her lover and hugged him both with arms and her legs wrapped around him. She then furiously kissed him, much to his surprise. Why Yuri? Yura chastised, but Yuri simply waved her sister off before she returned to smacking on the lips of her patriarch. After all, it had been a little bit since she got to taste the sweetness of his lips. But, there was something strange about this kiss. It was making her hopelessly intoxicated. Hell, it felt like her soul was on fire as she felt helplessly empowered by the sensation. I think Yuri-san wants to give him a party of her own, Atsui laughed. Omoi couldn't help laughing as well before Karui smacked them both over the head. The others continued to watch as Yuri tried to suck the very life out of Naruto's lips before she finally let him breathe. His eyes widened for a moment before he looked at her. Why'd you stop? He asked, a smirk making its way onto his lips. Yuri looked at him with a frown before she matched his smirk. She was prepared to challenge that suggestion before Kushina ripped Yuri off her son. I see someone's a little impatient. Need I remind you that I am Sochi's first wife? I get to kiss him first. Kushina replied with a growl while Yuri shoved her face into Kushina's. You always get to go first, you old hag. I'm not gonna let you one-up me forever. Yuri fired back. The two women snarled as everyone slowly backed away, especially when their hair started doing that freaky, wavy thing it did when all Uzumaki women were upset. Be both of you. Calm down. Yura pleaded. Off to the side, Naruto simply laughed before Tayuya slapped him on the shoulder. Hey dipshit, control your fucking harem. It took us a lot of work to get this party set up. If they start fighting, there's gonna tear the house down. Tayuya argued. Tayuya nay. Yukimaru stammered. Fortunately for Yukimaru and the others, Tayuya growled in pain when Riza clawed her own daughter's head with a vicious smile on her face. While I don't share my daughter's crass language, I would be inclined to agree, Naruto. Take care of them before they take care of us, and not in the fun way, Riza commented. The other members of the family continued to watch as the indignation between Kushina and Yuri continued to rise. Finally, Naruto walked into the storm and wrapped his arms around their waists. He then pulled them apart and kissed them both. Kushina gasped into his mouth before he kissed Yuri next. The latter swiftly caressed his cheek as he slid his hands down their slender frames. He alternated his kisses between them, savoring the lips of his mother and cousin. I feel very out of place right now, she commented with a chuckle before Gurren stepped forward. She slapped her hands over Yukimaru's ears and snarled. Can you four have your damn orgy later? She chastised with a faint blush on her cheeks. She'd taken off work to be a part of this celebration. She didn't take off work to see her cousin suck the breath out of his harem. I don't know. It's kind of hot, Fuka stated, making the others look at her in shock. She simply shrugged before Naruto finally released his mother and Yuri, then fell to the couch breathlessly before Naruto embraced Yura next. She jumped in shock, yet couldn't get a retort out before she was kissed as well. He dipped her back as her eyes rolled up in her head as a surge of pleasure rushed through her body. She saw how her sister and Kushina lost themselves in the kiss. It was like every piece of her was receiving pleasure from her cousin at the same time. The way his tongue swirled in her mouth made her moan helplessly. After 5 months, it was like her whole body was firing on all cylinders. She could even feel the arousal growing as her spirit longed for him. She simply knew that she wanted to stay with him for the rest of her life. She wanted to be his wife and no other. No other man was going to make her feel like this. Her heart was simply fluttering on clouds before he released her as well. Yura fell next to Kushina and Yuri, all three wide-eyed and flushed as Naruto approached the rest of his family. They each just looked at him with varying expressions. What? He asked. Atsui stepped forward and grinned. Nothing, cousin. We were just wondering if we should pack up the decorations cause it seemed like you were more than willing to have your own private party. Just say the word and we'll be out of your hair, Atsui exclaimed. Naruto glanced at the other blonde of the 5 in the family. He then stilled when Komachi swiftly hugged him. She wrapped her arms around his torso and rested her head on his neck. Ah, welcome back, Naruto. We're glad you're awake, Komachi said, pulling the hug even tighter. Naruto's eyes softened before he hugged Komachi back. Sorry for worrying you guys. It's good to be back. This might be the part where I promise to never do anything like this again, but I have no idea what's in store for all of us now. All I can promise you is that I'll do everything in my power to make sure I don't worry you guys ever again, the blonde returned with a bright, thoughtful smile. Soon enough, the entire family, yes even Tayuya, joined in for a family hug. Naruto found himself surrounded by the warmth of his family as he closed his eyes. Those lonely years in his apartment seemed so far away now. The cold nights and days having no one waiting for him were gone beneath a tender blanket of warmth from his family. He couldn't even spread his arms wide enough to hug them all. Once everyone let him go, Naruto quickly cleared his throat and gathered his family to him. Alright, before you guys go crazy, I do have something I want to say, the blonde spoke, walking over to the wall. He leaned against it as his family awaited his words. Based on his disposition, everyone seemed prepared for something serious. I wanted to let everyone know some things. First, I am not sure what happened to the shinigami. I can't really sense him and the summoning contract on my hand is a little blurred out. It seems the contract is still in effect since Ka-chan, Yuri, and Yura can still utilize the Shinigami's powers. However, there have been a few strange changes happening with my body. I don't know what this means but I want everyone to operate under the assumption that I can't bring you back to life for now. I'm also going to be in the underground pools a lot. I didn't take the Shinigami's warning seriously. If I had, then maybe I could have prevented that whole thing. I also encourage all of you to go into the pools as well. Otsutsuki Ashiki and the Akatsuki, they are still out there and they took the 4 Hokage with them. They wouldn't do this if they didn't have a plan in mind. I don't mean to dampen the mood, but I want everyone aware of what we're getting involved in, Naruto expressed. His words had a rather chilling effect amongst his family. They looked at him before they looked at each other. Well, that at least explains this freaky feeling I'm having. I was wondering why I couldn't sense you come through the door. It's like you don't even exist, Karui said. Shion and she looked at their cousin, the latter tilting his head. Now that you say that, it's true. I can't sense Naruto at all. I'm looking right at him and it's like he isn't even there. It's a really weird feeling, she said, folding his arms together. Amaru turned to Kushina. Can you sense anything? You're the second best out of all of us, the dark-skinned medic uttered. Soon, all eyes landed on Kushina as she stepped forward. She looked her son up and down, left and right, back and front. The others waited with bated breath as the Uzumaki matriarch's eyes lowered. Quote, I can sense something, but I don't know what it is. It's a bizarre feeling. It's like I'm sending a candle in the middle of a giant ocean. That's the only way I can explain it, Kushina voiced. So you're sensing a logical impossibility. As a scientist, I'm tempted to check your brain. Yet, I'm way too curious to study that. Karen answered, making Amaru shudder. She had not been enjoying working under Karen. Her cousin was way more ruthless than she ever remembered. Karen worked Amaru almost like a dog. Plus, the latter wasn't even getting paid for it. She was really feeling the weight of her punishment as time went on. Just knowing what experiments were going through her cousin's brain filled her with sorrow. Gee, great, Amaru laughed nervously. Karen patted her cousin's shoulder. Grab a blanket, Amaru. We have another all-nighter waiting for us. Amaru's shoulders slumped much to the amusement of everyone else. However, Naruto quickly brought the attention back to him. Anyway, I'm not ungrateful for what you guys have done for me. I love a good celebration. I just wanted to let everyone know my current circumstances. I didn't say this to bring down the mood, Naruto expressed, offering his family a reassuring smile. I would assume that we should keep this to ourselves. This doesn't seem like the type of conversation that would stir the greatest confidence in the world at the moment, especially since you've just woken up, Samui said evenly. She watched her cousin turn to her and nod. You'd assume right. And I am warning everyone right now, you are to only share this with the Hyuga and the Uchiha. If you think someone else should know, then come to me or Ka-chan first. And don't think I'm singling out Amaru for what happened. I hadn't taken into account Shino when I gave that suggestion. Now, I'm correcting that mistake, the blonde answered rather fiercely. While it was rather strange to keep information from the Raikage, Samui, Karui, Omoi, and Atsui reasoned that if the Raikage didn't ask, then there was no need to bring the information forward. Everyone agreed to the command and the first to ignite the fun was Tayuya. Soon enough, the Uzumaki compound was filled with celebration and food. Even very close friends attended the party once they heard it. The festivities celebrating the Kyuubi Jinchuriki's recovery were filled with joy, mirth, and exuberance. No one kept track of the time for that day as friends came together, surrounding the one who made it all possible, Uzumaki Naruto. When the summoner of the Shinigami actually had time to look at the state of his house, he couldn't even remember the last time his home had been so full to nearly bursting with people. By the time the celebration was over, the moon was already hanging in the sky and members of the Uzumaki family lay passed out around the house. As for Naruto, well, he quickly realized something else. He couldn't get drunk. Well, at least not fully. He felt a nice tingle or sensation, but his senses always remained alert, and the same was no different for many of his family members. Though, there were benefits to that. He got to see Yukimaru give Hanabi the deepest kiss he'd ever seen him give right in front of her father. Apparently, Yukimaru got a sip of alcohol when it was mixed with something else. That led Gurren into a furious tirade. Either way, the fun times ensued until the dead of night when the blonde walked through the living room. The smile on his face lowered as he watched his family sleep peacefully. No matter the celebrations, cheers, or funny moments, it still remained deep in his mind that he hadn't walked his home for 5 months. The steps he was ascending to his bed, he hadn't ascended them for 5 months. The halls he walked through, he hadn't walked for 5 months. So many things, so many times, so many events, he missed them all in all from one decision that hadn't been thought through. He arrived at his bedroom and opened the door. I'm home, the blonde thought as he stepped inside. He closed the door behind him and threw off his clothes. He'd just managed to put his pajamas on when he saw his mother come through the door. She closed it behind her until she saw him. Oh, so this is where you're hiding. Shouldn't you be passed out with everyone else? Kushina asked, stepping into the room and quickly throwing off her clothes. Naruto couldn't help but admire his mother's beauty as she got dressed for bed as well. How long are you going to stare at me? Kushina asked, making him jump and take him from his thoughts. He quickly averted his gaze from her, which made her laugh. Sorry, he apologized before he saw his mother approach him. She sat next to him and cupped his cheeks, turning his face toward her. Sochi, you haven't looked at me for 5 months. I'm happy to see that you're still attracted to me. While I'd cave in the face of any other man who looked at me like this, I'm so happy that you still look at me like this. Never divert your eyes from me, Kushina said calmly, reassuring her spouse and son as Naruto looked at her. He then touched her cheek and lowered his gaze for a moment. Ka-chan, how do you feel knowing that 2-chan's likely been revived? If the Akatsuki somehow took him, then we'll have to confront them eventually, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki said, pausing so that his mother might be able to ascertain where he was going with his words. And know where he was going, Kushina had. The Uzumaki patriarch saw the way she looked at him and her expression indeed was sorrowful. In fact, the blonde realized that there were numerous depths to her sorrow that he'd likely never know. After all, no one, not even him, could let go of a first love without a lot of time and effort. She then leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. Sochi, I love you. I think some part of me will always love Minato. The things he'd gone through for me made him the man that I loved with all my heart. However, I am worried for him to rest in peace from his troubles. I have no desire to return to my relationship with Minato and I do not regret being with you. If I met Minato right now, I would hold your hand boldly. I treasure what I had with him, but all that I am is given to you and no one else. We will save him together, but I have already been saved by having you, Kushina answered. Naruto's eyes softened as he looked at Kushina before the two shared a passionate, yet heartfelt kiss. The smack of their lips moved through the room as they partook of each other. Kushina quickly moved into her son's lap and kissed him harder as she pushed him to the bed. They fell together and deepened their kiss. Naruto slid his hands across his mother's form as she fit her body to his like a puzzle piece. With every kiss, she hoped to reassure him of her love, devotion, and attraction to him and him alone. When they parted, Naruto and Kushina panted as they looked at each other. The former then raised a hand and brushed his mother's red hair from the side of her face. You make a very convincing argument, Naruto answered. Kushina then gave her son a large grin. I could make it more convincing if you'd prefer. I've been without you for 5 months, Kushina uttered, her eyes lowering as Naruto saw the desire slowly etch itself across her face. He even felt the way his mother started to slide against his own. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki grinned, yet before they could follow through, the door to their bedroom burst open. Oh no you don't. We promised, Kushina. Are you going to break the secret pact? Yuri exclaimed with a deep growl as Naruto and Kushina noticed Yuri and Yura standing at the door. TCH, Kushina turned away and sucked her teeth as Yuri's ruby-colored hair started to flare up. You sucked your teeth. You just sucked your teeth, didn't you? Yura, she sucked her teeth at us. Yuri shouted, clenching her fists while Yura tried to play peacemaker, even if she agreed with her little sister. You did promise, Kushina-san, Yura claimed. The two sisters entered the room while Naruto looked at his mother in bewilderment. I feel like I'm missing something, he said before he gasped out when Yuri and Yura jumped on the bed, smothering him with Kushina. He held his lovers in his arms with a pained laugh as Kushina and Yuri butted foreheads. They snarled at each other while Yura and Naruto looked at each other. Well, more specifically, the latter looked at the former for an explanation. Yet, her look told him what he needed to know. Ni-sama, there's one thing you need to learn about women. Sometimes, it's better to not ask questions, Yura thought to herself as she and Naruto saw Kushina and Yuri continue to argue. At some point, the two opted to settle their disagreement later. Instead, Naruto found himself surrounded by a sea of red as his lovers lay with him in the bed. It was then that the Kyuubi Jinchuriki noticed something that he should have at this start. Is this bed bigger? He asked. We had lots of sleepovers, Yuri claimed as she nuzzled into Naruto's neck. This was officially the best night of her life. She never felt happier than having her cousin back in her life. Every day of the 5 months seemed like an eternity, a time of endless waiting, hoping, and praying that Naruto would wake up. Now, he was here and she couldn't be happier. As for Naruto, he spent some time contemplating what Yuri was saying. He had a few ideas of what she meant by sleepovers, but maybe that was just him fantasizing a bit too much. Either way, he was more than happy in the warm embrace of his women as he fell asleep with them. As he fell asleep, Naruto could have sworn that he heard strange voices resounding in his head. It was like a bunch of garbled noise beneath the ocean filled with decadent ambient music. Unfortunately, his mind couldn't focus on the sensations enough before his thoughts drifted. Sasuke found himself standing alone as he looked at the moon. The sound of the Land of Eddy's Seas pushed through his ears as he found himself irritated beyond belief. He only remembered one time being more irritated than this, and it was when Naruto stupidly got in Haku's ice mirrors instead of attacking from the outside. At that point, Sasuke honestly thought living was way too hard with a teammate like the Dobi. Yet, it was also Naruto who got him in this situation in the first place. His chest was beating like it was going to burst to pieces. He was even giving himself every reason to consider this as a bad idea. His thoughts told him of things that weren't true, telling him that he saw things that weren't really there, or feeling things that he didn't really feel, all in some vain, self-absorbed sense to prove something that didn't need to be broken. This is stupid. I should just call this off. Sasuke thought to himself. Unfortunately, or fortunately, it was too late. Sasuke. The Uchiha turned around and he noticed his mother approaching from the forest walkway. As soon as he saw her, it seemed as if all doubts had disappeared from his mind. Makoto appeared in the moonlight and a gentle blow of the wind made her hair move in a way that Sasuke couldn't help appreciating. It was official, he'd spent way too much time around Naruto. Sasuke faced his mother and exhaled. You actually came. I almost thought you weren't going to show, the Uchiha heir claimed, his mouth already speaking faster than his mind thought. When he heard his mother laugh, he suddenly found himself reminded of when she laughed whenever he said something nonsensical as a kid. Come on, Sasuke, do you really think I'd stand up my own son? Have a little more faith in me than that, Makoto giggled. However, her giggling slowly stood when Sasuke stood in front of her. She then realized that she had to lean her head up to look at him. She then started to get an idea about why he'd called her out here, and she was not mentally ready for it. His gaze was focused entirely on her in a way that made her cheeks burn. I'm not good at sappy speeches like Naruto. It's been nearly a year and I have seen things from you and things from me. So, I will do this my way. I called you out here to confirm one thing, Sasuke said as he cupped his mother's cheeks. Makoto widened her eyes. Sasuke, wait, maybe we, mmwphm. Makoto widened her eyes as her son aggressively and possessively kissed her. She couldn't even breathe from the way his lips brushed against hers. He wrapped his strong arms around her waist and even gently pushed her against the bark of one of the trees. She tried to speak, to make sense of everything, yet her son's fiery passion left her little time to gather her thoughts. Sure, with Yuna's approval, she'd taken to some light flirting with Sasuke. Yet, Sasuke never seemed responsive to her efforts. Of course, Makoto knew her son had a very closed-off personality for obvious reasons. Even Yuna had times when it was hard to draw out his affection, but when it was out, Sasuke could be the most endearing man in the entire world. It's just like Kushina said. It feels good, so good. Oh, Sasuke, my handsome boy. Makoto groaned as she succumbed to her son's embrace. She affirmed her affection when she touched his chest and then wrapped her arms around his neck. As for Sasuke, he savored this utterly mind-burning sensation and pleasure. All the while, he remembered Naruto's words. Alright, Sasuke, lesson 1, don't be you. And before you tear my head off, let me explain. Don't think about it. Do all your thinking when she isn't there. But when she is there, just charge in. Believe me, you won't remember whatever you were thinking about when she steps in. Naruto said as they continued to walk along the beaten path. Dobi, this sounds stupid, even for you, Sasuke retorted while Naruto glared at him. Do you want my help or not? The Kyuubi Jinchuriki inquired, looking absolutely offended, which made the Uchiha grimace. The latter then folded his arms and gritted his teeth before keeping his mouth shut. Seeing this, Naruto nodded. Good. Now, lesson 2, find a moment to look into her eyes. Look at her like you've got all the answers. Look at her like you're resolute. Even if you don't have all the answers, let her know that as a man you will figure it out. Trust me, moms always seem to know what their sons are thinking. Well, don't hide it then, Naruto explained. The more Sasuke listened, the more he thought he was going insane. There was no way this was going to work. Before Sasuke could speak, Naruto opened his mouth and imparted one last piece. And finally, lesson 3. Sasuke slowly broke the kiss with Makoto as they looked at each other. I love you, Ka-san. And, I won't let any other man have you, Sasuke said as Makoto's heart, and any resistance with it, crumbled into 1,000 pieces. She pulled her son closer as the two kissed beneath the land of Eddie's moonlight. First thing in the morning, Naruto could be seen walking deeper into the cave that led to the spiritual pool with Kushina, Yuri, and Yura behind him. "Ni-sama, are you sure you want to go immediately? You just recovered. The pool could prove too much for you. Don't you remember what happened to you the first time?" Yura asked. "I don't need to remember, Yura-chan. I felt it. I felt every bit of it. Believe me, ordinarily, I would agree with you. However, this isn't the time to remain lax. Those guys could return at any moment and I'll need every advantage we can get. That Ka-chan and I managed to escape that realm only happened because they weren't expecting it. Those guys won't get caught off again. I also don't know how to stop that damn teleport thing from happening. If I strengthened my soul then maybe I could have summoned Shin and taken care of them. All that dumb shit happened because I didn't take care of them fast enough. Shin warned me and I didn't listen," Naruto said as his lovers listened. "Naruto-ni, you can't blame yourself for that. It was all of our responsibility," Yuri expressed. Naruto turned to her and grinned. "If you think I'm gonna turn into a brooding mess, then don't worry. I know I can't be everywhere but it doesn't change the fact that I still have things I need to protect and if I can increase the chance by even a second, then it's worth it," he said. The four Uzumaki continued on their way down until after 2 hours, they made it to the pools. As expected, the spiritual pressure moving through the area. Naruto noticed that Kushina seemed to make some sort of bathing structure around it. There were little wooden shelves with towels and bins for clothes. Those were definitely not here when he'd been here. "You turned it into a small bathing house?" Naruto asked as he looked at Kushina. "Why not? We were the only ones coming down here and just sitting in spiritual water tends to get boring pretty quickly. It's also good for physical and mental enrichment," Kushina said as she began to remove her clothes. Her breasts flopped out of her shirt while Naruto watched unashamedly. Kushina noticed her son's gaze and smiled before she continued to get undressed, pulling down her pants. Naruto bit his lip before he turned and saw Yuri and Yura undress as well, giving him a beautiful and unhindered view of their beauty. They tossed their clothes away, opting to pose a little for the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. "Yo, Kushina, Naruto-ni looks like he's about to ravish us before we can even begin training. Look at him. He's already excited," Yuri said, pointing to the erection in Naruto's pants. Yet, he didn't hide it. He just continued to look at them while Yura blushed. Kushina laughed before she walked forward and brushed her son's chest. "Later, Naruto, if we do what you're probably imagining in that perverted head of yours, then we'll never get any work done. Though, I do like your stare," she said as she walked toward the pool. Yuri quickly kissed his cheek in response and walked away, though not before smacking her ass in front of him for emphasis. "It's been 5 months, Naruto-ni. I'm ready whenever you are," she expressed as she joined Kushina. The blonde was then stunned once more when Yura kissed his other cheek. She offered him a shy smile before walking out until the Kyuubi Jinchuriki was the only one left in the area. He continued to stare even when there was nothing left to look at. Finally, after about a minute, he raised a hand and covered his mouth. 1,000 thoughts ran through his head before he finally bit his lip. 5 months, he thought to himself before finally grabbing a towel and rejoining his lovers. Once he appeared, he took in the vastness of the spirit pool. The pressure coming from it seemed a lot denser than before. Now that the blonde thought of it, he wondered why these Otsutsuki hadn't targeted the pool before making their getaway. Perhaps it was because they didn't have time to do it, but they should have sensed its presence. Well, that could just be some good fortune for him. He wasn't sure why he needed this, but if this could help him potentially recover the shinigami and maybe even his powers, then it was worth it. Naruto spotted Kushina, Yura, and Yuri in the pool, likely ready to help him if ever he needed it. He looked back at the pool and took a small breath. He then stepped inside. He expected some pain or discomfort, but surprisingly he felt nothing at all save for liquid against his skin. "Ni-sama, do you feel alright?" Yura asked. He turned to her. "Yup, I feel fine for now. Nothing out of the ordinary," he explained. The 3 girls exhaled the breaths they were holding. "Good, then let's take it slow. If you ever feel any discomfort then let us know. Also, try not to push yourself too hard. We're just trying to get into the swing of things again. Do you understand?" Kushina asked, a knowing glare on her face. It was a glare that the Uzumaki patriarch was all too familiar with. "Gee, got it," he replied. Thus, Kushina's glare turned into a smile as they continued to walk deeper into the pools. Yet, things already started to take a turn as Kushina, Yura, and Yuri watched Naruto keep up with them every step of the way. It got to the point that Kushina turned to him and grabbed his ear. "Sochi, I believe we told you not to overdo it. Why are you trying to keep us with us?" Kushina asked. Naruto groaned in discomfort as his mother pulled his ear, yet he answered anyway. "What do you mean? I haven't felt anything yet. I can keep going. Believe me, I'll let you know when I feel like I can't take it," Naruto responded earnestly, surprising Kushina, Yura, and Yuri. "You, Ni-sama, do you know where you are right now?" Yura inquired as Naruto turned around and noticed that he couldn't even see the edge of the entrance to the underground pool anymore. Naruto looked down and he noticed that they were stomach deep in the spirit pool. Even Yuri and Yura were showing minor signs of fatigue and discomfort. "I was just following you guys. I promise I'm fine. You're making it rather easy to be distracted after all," Naruto asserted. Despite their unease, the three Uzumaki ladies shared a chuckle. Kushina looked over her son and it appeared as if he was telling the truth. Yet, how was that possible? He'd been out of the pools for months. It had taken them weeks to even get to this point. Finally, Kushina exhaled. "Alright, but the moment you feel anything wrong, you stop." "Understood?" she asked. Her son and husband quickly agreed as the group of four continued onward. Surprisingly, it wasn't long before Yuri stopped first. Yura was next. Kushina was last. At different parts of the pools, the lovers of Uzumaki Naruto could only watch in utter shock and confusion as he walked past them, going further and further until they couldn't even see him anymore. As for Naruto, he didn't remember when he stopped following his lovers. The further into the pools he went, the better he felt. A myriad of seals and symbols flourished through his mind as he felt himself neck-deep in the pool. Walking slowly turned to floating, and floating swiftly turned to swimming. Naruto swam down, going deeper and deeper as every pore in his body seemed to be bursting with untold power. Even his hair changed, glowing through every color like a vibrant rainbow as he descended. Strangely enough, he felt like he didn't even need to breathe. Sure, the pool was filling his nostrils, yet every facet of his body was charged with life. He could stay down there as much as he wanted. Yet, even with the pools, there was a bottom to be reached and the pressure was actually starting to be felt by the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. As he went down, he then noticed a type of platform with drawn symbols on it at the bottom. He swam to it and landed his feet on the ground. Despite the pools, the rocks felt hot to his feet. "What the hell is this?" Naruto thought to himself as he approached carefully. His body felt a lot lighter. He approached the platform and stood on it. As he looked at it, knowledge seemed to flood into his head, almost like instructions. He didn't know how this was happening, but maybe the shinigami would have explained it if he were here right now. Of course, that wasn't gonna stop Uzumaki Naruto now that he'd managed to get all the way down here. Granted, he wasn't expecting to get to a place like this so quickly. That said, if this stuff was supposed to be for strengthening his soul, then why did it become so powerful now? As Naruto approached the platform, he noticed a gold gem and a violet gem on each side of the platform. Once he looked at them, it felt like a surge of knowledge came into the Uzumaki patriarch's mind. He raised his hands and placed them on the gems. Immediately, his eyes widened as the golden flames of the beginning and the dark flames of the end engulfed his body. Then came the pain. There came pain greater than he'd ever experienced in his entire life. Naruto's screams were garbled under the spirit pool as veins stretched out along his body. He could feel his body breaking down so quickly that he couldn't even brace for the agony. His hair fell off his head, his body withered and aged. He tried to pull his hands off the glowing gems, yet either he was too weak or the pull of the gems was simply too strong. Either way, the youth and strength that he'd prided himself in were quickly sucked away. His aged legs failed him and forced him to his knees. The unholy agony forced his body into shock as his eyes rolled up in his head. Finally, his hands released the gems and collapsed to the ground. When Naruto opened his eyes again, he found himself standing in a large, dark hallway. The structure reminded him of some strange castle from a kingdom not of his own world. Yes, he was aware that didn't really make a lot of sense, but it was the only way he could describe it. Either way, he slowly stood up, noticing that his body had returned to normal. The pain seemed so far away as he began to walk. It's official. I'm going crazy, Naruto thought to himself as he maneuvered through the castle. It seemed weird, yet he kind of knew where he was going. It was almost like he'd been here before. He traversed impossibly massive corridors with the finest carpet he'd ever stepped on. The longer he walked, the more he started to notice the 5 statues that lined the walls. They all seemed so strange to him. The statues didn't look like they were carved from regular stone. They didn't even look human save for one. 2 were depicted as wearing armor, and 1 was humanoid, yet so far removed from what could be considered human. The 4th was quadrupedal, or even having no form at all. The last he remembered very well. That was the 5th vessel of the shinigami, Otsutsuki Hamura. Realization slowly came upon the blonde as he understood these to be the previous bearers of the shinigami's might. He took in their features and touched their frames. The sculptures felt hot to the touch as he gazed upon them. Yet, Naruto wasn't even allowed to ponder the statues more before a voice came upon him. You're taking too long, young summoner. You shall perish into the void at this rate. Before Naruto could even register the voice that somehow poured into his head, he found himself standing in front of another pool. Yet, he realized that he wasn't alone. In the middle of the pool, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki spotted a familiar face. The long hair, pale skin, pupil-less eyes that reminded him so much of a Hyuga, it was all there. The man slowly opened his eyes and offered the young summoner a small smile. I must say, out of all of us, that was a rather abysmal performance. I suppose I should offer you congratulations. You are the best of the worst. No one has fallen that quickly to the trial like that, the man said. A brief flash of annoyance ran through Naruto's face at the insult, yet he tried to keep himself under control. Gone were those days that he'd love to punch someone in the face if they said the wrong thing to him. Not his best moments, yet some of them were earned. Either way, he stepped forward. Shin? The blonde asked. The man's eyes lowered before his smile strengthened. Come now Uzumaki Naruto. Has so much time passed that you have forgotten me so quickly? Unfortunately, the spirit of death is no longer with me, the man said as the blonde's eyes widened. Otsutsuki Hamura, Naruto exclaimed in realization. In hindsight, perhaps he should have led with Hamura first rather than the shinigami, but Naruto had been looking at Hamura's form too many times to not see Shin. The younger brother of Otsutsuki Hagoromo slowly nodded. Piece that together, did you? Very good. Now, unfortunately, you've wasted too much time here. Try not to fail your trial so easily next time. Naturally, I sympathize with your plight. The same thing happened to me when it was my time. Fight the pull. Fight the pull with all your might. That is the only to prove your worth, Hamura said as he raised his hand and engulfed Naruto in a torrent of golden and violet fire. Wait, what do you? Before Naruto couldn't even think, he opened his eyes and found himself back in the spirit pool, lying on the ground. He swiftly righted himself until he floated back on the floor. He looked back at the 2 gems. A thought made him wonder if he'd imagined all of that, but the pain was simply too real for him to just forget. Even now, his hands shook as he remembered the things he'd been forced to endure. He also remembered those statues and the Hamura at that other pool. Fight the pull. What does that even mean? Unless, I should be trying not to let the gems take the flames. But what's the point? I could just not touch them then, Naruto thought to himself. He slowly reached out to touch one of the gems, but the briefest of warnings passed through his head and made him hesitate. This was no game. There was only a limited number of trial and error attempts. How many that was Naruto didn't know, but he couldn't afford to take that chance right now. The blonde took a step back and then exhaled. I wonder, the blonde said before he took a step back and summoned a shadow clone. The clone quickly walked over to the pillar and touched the gems. Then the process repeated, and all the pain with it. Naruto opened his eyes and he saw Hamura looking down at him. The younger brother of Otsutsuki Hagoromo seemed notably less amused. Well, I believe I should at least praise you for ingenuity, if nothing else. I mean this as respectfully as possible, but are you perhaps an enjoyer of pain, Uzumaki Naruto? A smart individual would have withdrawn and attempted this when they collected their thoughts, Hamura said. Naruto growled and stood to his feet. I liked you better when you were more stoic like fucking Sasuke. Well, why don't you help me out here, Otsutsuki geezer? What is this place? Why am I even doing this? Where did Shin go? What kind of training even is this? The blonde asked, a bunch of frustration being released as he watched Hamura maintain his rather composed and regal posture above the small lake beneath him. Your rather crude remarks aside, you are a rather simple man, Uzumaki Naruto. Naturally, that has its benefits as well. All your questions can be answered with a simple answer. To make the matter rather elementary, you have been given the privilege of undertaking the trial to become the sixth vessel of the Shinigami. Chapter 100. Quote, the law of harvest is to reap more than you sow. Sow an act, and you reap a habit. Sow a habit and you reap a character. Sow a character and you reap a destiny, by James Allen. The next time Naruto awoke within the spirit pool, he quickly stood up and stepped away from the golden and violet gemstones. His mind had become a jumbled mess of nerves ever since the revelation from Otsutsuki Hamura came upon him. So stunned was he that he lost all the time to speak with the younger brother of Hagoromo before he returned to the real world. I'm gonna be Shin's next vessel. That single question seemed wrapped around thousands of others, of which the young Uzumaki had no answer. He'd lost 5 months of his life and now he was being told that he'd become the vessel of the god of death. But, why? Why him? He was just Naruto. He had no idea of the complexities of godhood. Hell, he didn't even want to be a god. All he desired was the power to keep his family and friends safe. For him, that was more than enough. Yet, the universe seemed determined to tell him that his dreams were impossible without the strength to back them up. Forces always seemed to target his family for higher plans. Jashin, the Otsutsuki, how many forces would come up against him? Of course, he wished for more power. If he had more power, he could have cared for those Otsutsuki guys anytime he wanted. And yet, those two were temporary. Something told him that becoming the vessel of the Shinigami wasn't something he could back out of once he agreed. What was even the process? Would he even be himself anymore? Would it be the Shinigami married to his mother instead of him? Would they have a melding of their personalities? Would he even be him anymore? Naruto stepped away from the platform and swiftly swam back to the surface. Once he made it back ground flooring, he walked back through the cave, his thoughts clouded in great confusion. What was worse was that he felt like there was no one to talk to. Kurama, Morio, the kindred, and the rest of his summons were all silent. The only one he could question was himself, and he simply didn't have what he needed. That is, until he noticed his mother, Yura, and Yuri waiting for him. However, as soon as they saw him they covered their eyes. Whoa. Naruto ni, stop right there. You're too bright. Yuri exclaimed hurriedly, much to Naruto's confusion. He looked at himself and didn't notice anything different. Bright? What are you talking about? He asked. Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't able to see what they saw. Kushina, Yura, and Yuri had been concerned when Naruto didn't come back after the last 5 hours. They were stunned that he could travel so far after having only just returned to them since his recovery. It wasn't like they could help him either. He was too far and no matter how they strained themselves, the pool would have utterly consumed them if they tried to handle more of its might than what they had. The Uzumaki Patriarch's lovers could only watch as a bright light in the depths of the cavern only got brighter. Pressure, the likes of which they had never felt before, came upon them and they were forced to squint. Yet, they knew it was Naruto. It could only be him. How he seemed to glow with such strength was beyond them, but they had to stop him from getting too close. Even more than that, they had to stop him from returning to the surface. If he came up with that level of pressure, it'd likely be enough to knock out the entire island. Ni-sama, you're glowing. Just stay there for a moment, Yura claimed before she turned around and ran inside. She then grabbed some towels and threw them over to him. Put those on. Just for a little while, Yura instructed. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki almost felt something akin to mock hurt before he saw the towel waiting in the water. He then shrugged and picked up the towels. He wrapped them around his waist and then threw one over his head. He wrapped his body in the towels as best he could. Unfortunately, his view of his lovers was a little obstructed, but he supposed he would have to put up with it because he heard their sighs of relief. Well, it's not perfect but it'll do. Naruto ni, what happened to you? Yuri exclaimed as Naruto approached them. The pressure was still there and there were little pockets of light piercing through the towels but nothing unmanageable. They could deal with one or the other but not both. Naruto stepped out of the pool and sat next to his lovers. Even without seeing his face, the three could tell that something was wrong. His head was dropped and he didn't speak immediately. After a moment, Kushina touched his covered cheek and shifted his gaze to her slowly. It's alright, Sochi. We're right here. We're not going anywhere. No matter what happens, we're here for you. So tell us. Tell us what happened, Kushina said, her voice smooth and comforting, clearly no different from that of a mother seeking to comfort the cares and worries of her child. Naruto looked in his mother's direction and then he felt Yuri and Yura touch him on the other side. He couldn't help lightly chuckling when he heard them say that. How many times had he said the same, especially when he was younger? Always moving ahead with bullheaded optimism. Then again, maybe that was how he had gotten so far in life. Well, you guys might not believe this but, I think I'm being tested to become the next vessel for the shinigami, Naruto said. No, Kushina, Yuri, and Yura could most definitely not believe that. Thus, Naruto began explaining everything that he had experienced when he made it to supposedly the far end of the cavern. Then he met Otsutsuki Hamura again. He claimed that the gold and violet gemstones were a test, one that he could very likely fail and even have his very soul consumed. And, save for mercy from Kami herself, there would be no coming back from something like that. The more Naruto spoke, the sooner the light faded from his visage, allowing his lovers to look at him. They took the towel off him and noticed his expression. His face was surprisingly even. Neither joy nor anger could be found there and that seemed a little concerning. Yet, finally his eyes hardened and he turned to Yura and Yuri. Standing to his feet, he stood in front of them before getting onto his knees. Yura-chan, Yuri-chan, you both have put up with me for long enough. I was hoping to wait until the market recovered a little more but knowing how my life is turning out, I'm not going to leave anything to chance. While I was in that hospital bed, I thought about how you would have felt if I hadn't woken up. I don't know what will happen in the future, but if I take it with Ka-chan, I also want to take it with both of you as well. Will you spend the rest of your life with me as my wives? Naruto asked. Yura didn't even have time to be stunned by the proposal before Yuri crashed into Naruto and kissed him fervently. Kushina couldn't resist the large smile on her face as Yuri shoved her tongue inside Naruto's mouth. Yes Naruto ni. I'll be your wife. Yuri clamored over and over between kisses. That had been the last shred of resistance she had left as she rubbed his body. Elation was threatening to overwhelm her as she felt her lover's arousal against her flesh. Yuri could already imagine her wedding. She was elated to have one but was fine without it. She didn't need a public display of commitment. No other man would have her. If by some misfortune Naruto perished and she lived, then she would remain single for the rest of her life. Why Yuri? Yura clamored despite the heavy blush on her cheeks. Of course, she was happy, overwhelmed with joy even. She'd been fantasizing about the idea of being married to Naruto for a very long time. They had even talked about it in their downtime. Something always seemed to get in the way and while Yura assumed that Naruto's proposal was just as much concern over the future as was love for them, she could feel his sincerity and devotion. Alright you, don't stop getting it on yet, Kushina said as she plucked Yuri off her fiancé. Don't try to stop me. I've been waiting for this. Yuri growled before Kushina pinched the Sanbi Jinchuriki's cheeks. We really need to work on your cooperation. Hasn't someone been waiting just as long, if not longer than you to keep the promise she made to your parents? Give her a turn, Kushina said as Yuri's eyes widened. Everyone turned to Yura who appeared like a wild deer caught by hunters. Her eyes were like saucers as Yuri gasped. Oh, well, go on, Yura-ne. I know you're dying to kiss him too. Yuri claimed, embarrassing her sister even more than before. Yet, all her thoughts were washed away when Naruto cupped her cheeks and kissed her next. The kiss was just like many others and the pleasure that ran through her mind was like being overrun by a warm waterfall over her head. His tongue against hers, her entire body felt like a bundle of nerves being wound up. She simply couldn't take the feeling, desiring more of it as their lips smacked together. Her lover pushed her until her head rested against the cavern wall. En-ni-sama, she panted, his lips asking for her answer. Yet, she already knew the answer. She knew it as soon as the question came out of Naruto's mouth. Why yes, I accept too. I want to be your wife as well, Yura answered making Naruto's heart soar with joy again that the two sisters had accepted his proposal. Of course, he was ashamed that he didn't have any rings to present to them, but he already knew that he would correct that mistake when given the time. Meanwhile, Kushina watched the proceedings and finally clapped her hands together. Alright, I believe this is a separate cause for celebration. However, I think we should all relax before you two decide to jump my son's bones, not that I don't understand the temptation. Now, I believe we should continue this conversation, Kushina suggested. At the very least, Yuri had the nerve to feel sheepish. She rubbed the back of her head while Yura cleared her throat. That said, Naruto was the only one with a rather smug smile on his face. It was one Kushina couldn't say she appreciated in jest. Her son was looking positively pleased with himself. Then again, when you had 3 beautiful redheads as your wife and 2 fiancés, then perhaps you could feel a little happy. Kushina pulled her son's cheek and smiled a little annoyedly. And you, wipe that grin off your face. Don't think you're in for an easy time. Now, keep up with the story while we all get dressed. I think we've trained enough for today, the matriarch of the Uzumaki clan said. The others agreed, and so Naruto continued with what Hamura told him as they exited the pools. The journey back to the surface gave the pressure from Naruto more than enough time to normalize as they walked outside. Once they were done, Kushina, Yura, and Yuri were pretty much brought up to speed on the entire thing, and they still weren't sure what to think of it. They were also aware of the concerns Naruto was facing. But if you don't do it, then it's likely that you won't be able to contend with those Otsutsuki guys. Just battling their avatars took you and Kushina that long. It is a tempting offer. Isn't that basically an invitation for Nisama to become a divine being? Yura inquired. Kushina placed a finger beneath her chin and continued to think on the issue. It's unfortunate that the Shinigami cannot answer any inquiries. However, it's likely that he has always been preparing you for this moment. Tell us, what do you want to do? The older redhead asked, turning her attention to her son. The group of 4 continued to walk along the paths of the land of eddies. The air was clean and the roads were quiet. The trees blew in the wind as Naruto contemplated how best to answer this question. If you asked me immediately, I would have done my best Sasuke impression and said that I wouldn't mind taking the power. After all, even if Amaru had a hand in what happened, it still stands that if I had been stronger then I likely could have prevented a lot of that. And, I could keep all of you safe. That means the world to me, he explained. Naruto-ni, there is no life worth living if we don't have you. But, I think given these circumstances, there's going to be trouble whether you become the Shinigami or not. If you can't prevent the trouble, then simply get us through it. Sometimes, that's the best thing that can be done. At least that's what I believe. Besides, it sounds like geezer Sage Hamura hasn't changed much. Though, if he's talking to you, and he's supposed to be the current vessel of the Shinigami, then, why can't you ask him what's going on? Yuri asked. Naruto's lips thinned. Cause something tells me he wouldn't answer. He reminds me of Gramps Sandame. Old guys love to be cryptic. I also believe this is something I'll have to figure out on my own. And I'll have to do it quickly. Those guys wouldn't orchestrate that whole thing if they didn't have something planned, he answered. Kushina glanced off to the side for a moment before she hummed. We still haven't discovered the person who attacked Sasuke, Kakashi, and Yuna some time ago. Perhaps that was also a part of their plan, the matriarch of the Uzumaki clan theorized. But if that was the case, then why didn't they show up when all that stuff was going down 5 months ago? Yuri inquired. Unfortunately, that was a question that simply had no answers. Instead, there was only a lot of conjecture and hypotheses. The group continued to walk in silence, heading back to the clan compound. On the way back, Yura steadily fostered a thought that came to her as she looked at her new fiancé. Ni-sama, say that you do become the newest vessel of Shinigami-sama. Wouldn't that make you capable of traveling to a place like the moon easily? Perhaps it could be the route to the answers we're looking for, Yura suggested. Naruto thought on this matter and agreed that this could be a possible outcome. Yura-ne, Naruto-ni just came out of a coma and you want him to go back to fighting again? Yuri questioned exasperatedly. The Sanbi Jinchuriki was just on her way to getting married. They just got Naruto back. What if this took even more years away from him? Then again, he'd become a god. Would that not mean he was outside the boundaries of time and space? But what about the rest of them? Yura, startled by her little sister's outburst, quickly shook her head. No, that wasn't what I was saying. I just believe that. A clap of Kushina's hands stopped Yura's potential excuse for her actions. Yuri knows perfectly well what you meant, Yura. However, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Naruto still has to complete the trial given to him. We also do not know if becoming the vessel of the shinigami is the only way to battle these guys. While we must take this situation seriously, we must equally express caution. Naruto's already acting strange, given that he was in a coma for 5 months and yet surpassed all of us in one day. Never mind that I still can't feel any energy within him, even though he spent at least 4 hours down there. As Naruto stated, we could have prevented that disaster if we had taken our training seriously. So, we will continue our training. We will decide once Naruto has had time to adjust, Kushina suggested. Yuri and Yura nodded as the group of 4 approached the house. However, before they could enter, Naruto watched Kushina grin as she grabbed Yuri and Yura. And now, Naruto, it's time for the man to get lost. We'll meet up with you later. Kushina claimed eagerly as she dragged Yuri and Yura away, the 2 sisters groaning as Kushina led them down the road, likely to the part of the land where the civilians live. It was then that Naruto understood what was going on and simply laughed. I guess Ka-chan always wanted to plan a wedding for me, though I doubt she expected the first one to be with her, the Kyuubi Jinchuriki thought before he entered the house. As soon as he did, he found a large stack of papers shoved into his arms. The blonde gasped before he easily held them up. What the? Naruto uttered before he noticed Komachi on the other side. Ah, good morning. She told me to deliver these to you. Now that you're awake, you can complete your work, Komachi replied as Naruto looked at the massive stack of documents. He then frowned as he realized another reason why his mother had run away with Yura and Yuri. How is it this much? Wasn't Ka-chan handling it? Naruto inquired. This was ridiculous. The paperwork was going all the way to the ceiling. He hadn't had this level of paperwork in a very long time. Ah, I'm not sure. It has been piling up outside your door, Komachi answered. Naruto grimaced as he looked at the stack before meticulously taking them to his office. He then set them on his desk and looked at their ridiculous number. After a moment, he pinched the bridge of his nose before he quickly got to work. With a quick scan of the compound, he then realized that he was the only one around. Even Komachi had vanished, which made the Kyuubi Jinchuriki grin annoyedly. Ha, 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 alright guys. 2 can play at that game. You all don't know who you're messing with. The blonde answered to himself before he began on his work. Yuna looked at Makoto evenly as she stood in the kitchen area with a large smile on her face. There is no way I was like that when I got kissed, Yuna thought to herself as she saw Makoto continue to smile as if her mind was going 1,000 miles a second. Well, at least it proved that Sasuke finally got his shit together. Granted, Yuna wasn't sure how adjusted she was going to become from this outcome, but that look on Makoto's face almost made it worth it. She's been like that since this morning. Yuna turned her head and noticed Itachi standing next to her. He seemed particularly amused with the sight while Yuna scrunched up her face. I guess, but it's starting to kind of freak me out. Then again, I guess I was the enabler of this whole thing, so I'm only reaping what I sowed, Yuna claimed, folding her arms before she heard Itachi chuckle. So I believe the term, sister wives, now applies to you. I must inquire, how does it feel? The older of Makoto's children questioned. Yuna rolled her eyes and shoved her hands in her coat pocket. I liked you better when you were depressing, she said as she turned and walked out the door. Itachi watched her go and chuckled. Truth be told, this was a lot more fun than he thought it might be. Of course, Itachi always hoped things would work out for the best, but something was amusing about this whole thing, especially given his little brother's personality. Sasuke, despite his good looks, most definitely did not have the personality for relationships. That he would find himself involved with 2 women was something out of the realm of fiction as Itachi saw it. Oh, Itachi, how long have you been standing there? Makoto asked, a gentle smile on her face. Itachi's smile evened out as he realized that he had been caught. Then again, it wasn't like he was trying to hide himself. Even then, it wasn't like his mother hadn't noticed them. No matter how happy she was still a highly trained kunoichi. Maybe she just played the bitter she didn't mind. Either way, Itachi answered. Long enough, Ka-san. I also see that you are in a particularly good mood. I haven't seen you smile like this in a long time. What could be the reason? Itachi inquired. Makoto quickly blushed and slapped her son's shoulder. Now, don't tease your mother. You're a perceptive man, Itachi. Now, off with you, his mother remarked. Taking the hint, Itachi removed himself from the compound just as Sasuke appeared. He turned and noticed his mother smiling at him. He looked at her before he looked away. The Uchiha couldn't believe what they did last night. Yet, all those dreams and fantasies that seemed to toy with his mind had finally become a reality. What was even stranger was how comfortable he was with all of it. Perhaps the only thing he found himself embarrassed with was just the thought that he, Uchiha Sasuke, would be stupid enough to follow in Naruto's footsteps. And I can't even tell if it's a good or bad thing, Sasuke thought. Yet, it was the path that he chose, and he wasn't going to insult his mother by backing out of it now. Maybe Sasuke had a commitment problem. Well, perhaps there was no better time to be committed as a man than to have two lovers. The Uchiha approached his mother and kissed her. It quickly became clear that even Makoto would have to get used to this before she returned the kiss a little more leisurely. When they pulled back, they contemplated the moment before Sasuke cleared his throat. What was that for? Makoto asked, her cheeks rather flushed from the unexpected display of affection. Then again, perhaps young people were getting bolder these days. Sasuke looked at his mother momentarily, wondering if he'd been a little impulsive. His mother wasn't Yuna, they were very much different, and he'd have to work on learning that. Did you? Not like that. I figured I didn't need a reason to kiss you now, Sasuke said rather meekly. His question was expressed in such a way that Makoto felt a little bad for her own question. She then smiled and touched her son's cheek. No, I liked it. We Uchiha aren't the most expressive people. I certainly didn't feel much with your father. Plus, this is still a very new relationship, one with unnavigated desires. I'm happy you wish to be more affectionate. If that's what you want, then I will endeavor to do the same as well, Makoto claimed. Sasuke looked at his mother for a long moment before he nodded. I would like that then, he said with a grin before the two heard the door open. In came Itachi. Instantly, Sasuke and Makoto could tell that something was wrong because Itachi's Sharingan was active and his gaze was as dark as when Sasuke and Yuna fought him. Itachi, what's wrong? Makoto asked, dropping everything and approaching her eldest son. She grabbed his arms, her eyes filled with worry and seriousness. Her years of experience as a kunoichi blossomed in an instant. From all facial expressions, eye motions, and body posture, Itachi came back to deliver something to Sasuke. Of that, Makoto had no doubts. Itachi turned to Sasuke. You have a guest, Sasuke. I suggest you not wait to greet them. They have Yuna, Itachi said. It was quick but a shadow of unholy rage came upon Sasuke's face. Just from Itachi's statement alone, Sasuke was able to draw several conclusions. Not only was Yuna captured, but the enemy was someone who could best her and Itachi, and do it without alerting even Kushina or Naruto on the island. Sasuke's eyes hardened as he approached the door. He then opened it. As soon as he stepped outside, he noticed nothing out of the ordinary. However, once he continued, the Uchiha quickly noticed his surroundings warp around him. The skies turned as red as blood and the sun became cloaked in pulsing, burning black fire. Time itself seemed to slow down as Sasuke noticed a woman leaning against a tree. Her eyes seemed as dark as the night sky and her hair as black as Orochimaru's heart. There was a strange smile on her face and a pressure that he didn't like. It brought him back to when he was a genin, facing Zabuza or Orochimaru for the first time. That said, this felt insurmountably worse than those. This was like the same when he laid his eyes on Jashin for the first time. When he looked at this woman, it was like his very sanity was being disentangled. Bit by bit, piece by piece, he struggled to maintain himself, not even realizing that he'd activated his Sharingan. Even his eyes started to bleed as his heart began racing. Whether out of unconscious fear or worry, the Uchiha heir then turned his head and saw Yuna resting against the base of the tree. She seemed to be breathing, though the Uchiha noticed the hand imprints around her throat. Yuna had likely been strangled into unconsciousness while this woman fought off Itachi. She must have bested him, which explained his tense expression and his willingness to deliver a message to Sasuke and Makoto. This was also the reason why neither Sasuke nor his mother heard the battle. This woman likely isolated the space and, given that neither Naruto nor Kushina were here then. I'm here like you wanted. Now, tell me who you are and what you want, Sasuke said, his voice measured yet tense. Of course, he was angry about his lover, but he knew that he had to approach this matter carefully. The woman then spoke. You know, you are in my good graces so far. Do not ruin it with passive belligerent speech. However, I am willing to admit that my approach was hardly becoming of me. In the future, tell your woman to be less aggressive when one inquires about you, the woman said. Sasuke's eyes widened, hearing her voice behind him. He turned his head and saw the black-haired woman standing behind him with a mysterious smile. Even the Sharingan couldn't track her movements. No, I shouldn't be surprised. I'm likely dealing with a divine being, Sasuke thought before he turned his head and noticed the woman back in front of him. Sasuke was about to speak but he found his mouth forced shut. And I would advise you not to ruin the opportunity of which I am about to present to you with your idle chatter and questions. If you care about my brother's summoner in this world, then you shall be quick to listen and slow to speak, Uchiha Sasuke, she said rather blatantly. Sasuke's glare hardened, but the words he wanted to say were stuck in his throat as the woman continued onward. The longer Sasuke looked at her, the more he realized he had met this woman before. He watched the way she moved and remembered those eyes as she approached his battered form and touched his forehead, forcefully taking the memories from him. When the woman looked at him, she noticed his expression and released a simple chuckle. It seems as if you remember me. Good, then, I shall speak. Uchiha Sasuke, I, Amaterasu Omikami, deem you worthy enough to become my summoner, she said, her voice radiating with strength that seemed to echo through the fabric of eternity itself. Even for him, Sasuke couldn't believe his ears. Hell, there was even some sort of humorous sense of irony here, given that all Sasuke wanted was power to defeat his brother and avenge his clan. Now that he had done all of that, a literal goddess was granting him the same power that resided within Naruto. While Sasuke was sorting his thoughts, he looked up and noticed Amaterasu wagging her finger. First lesson we shall have to work on is your thoughts. They are much too decipherable. What I shall give you is not what my brother would give your friend. You shall simply play your role in preparing him for what shall come. In preparing him, you shall prosper as well. Besides, I believe you and your clan have used my name enough. Consider this my form of restitution, Amaterasu said while Sasuke continued to look at her. Even if he wanted to say something to her, he couldn't. The black-haired goddess recognized this and sighed. You may now speak, Amaterasu said. Just like that, the words that seemed to burn up in Sasuke's throat were freed. He staggered back for a moment before he continued to glare at the goddess of the sun. Oh, believe him, he had plenty he wanted to say to this woman, especially in regards to her methods. Yet, he focused on Yuna first.